The parchment smelled of wood smoke and wet leather, as if it had been carried through rain and held near a campfire to be read by orange, sputtering light. Tyrion turned it over in his hands and studied the seal, a blob of black wax that had been pressed with no sigil at all, only a smear where a ring might have been. Secrets wore poor clothes more often than velvet. He broke the wax with a fingernail and read by the crooked glow of the candle upon his desk. The tower of the hand slept around him. If stone could sleep, its long corridors caught every draught and poured a soft moan through the night, a presence you felt along the back of your neck. His wine was cool. The goblet, an old thing with dents shaped like moon craters, left wet rings on maps of the riverlands. He read the letter once, then again, and when his eyes reached the line about the music he glanced up, listening, as if the walls of King's Landing might sing hard and sweet and murderous. They did not. Beyond, the city's night was a hand closing around itself. Dogs worrying the bones of alleys, a guttering lantern somewhere, a boat's oars whispering along the blackwater. He held the parchment near the candle just long enough to watch the edges curl brown. The script was careful and even, the sort one acquired from a septon's cane or an old tutor who believed in the crueling of knuckles. The words said little on their face. An invitation to reconciliation, a feast to mend old wounds, assurances of bread and salt, a promise that the music will be very fine, and that the chords will be deep and lasting. It was not signed. It was nonetheless an address. Not to him, but to another, a copy or draft of something meant to go to the twins. He remembered Tywin's lessons. If you mean to strike a man in the dark, be sure he cannot strike back in the light. And if you mean to strike too, let the first blow be the lie the second hides behind. Where did you come by it? Tyrion asked. His voice sounded small in the room, a sparrow among owls. Varys stood at the edge of the candle's reach with the air of a man who had found himself in darkness by accident and was patiently considering pathways out. His hands were folded like a supplicant's. "A friend in the Riverlands," he said, and smiled too gently to be trusted. "A cautious soul. He plucks lost letters from the air, like apples, and squirrels them away. You have no shortage of enemies there. It is a very windy orchard. You weren't frightened carrying this through the streets?" Tyrion said. "It would be a poor jest to have the spider found in a web of his own spinning." Frightened? Varys' lids lowered. The city is not frightened at night. It merely waits. Waiting is a form of hunger. Tyrion took a sip of wine, tasted of plums and the faintest ash. "My father," he said, no question mark at the end of it. Varys did not trouble himself with pretenses. The words are not his, but the hand behind the hand. One senses it. Lord Walder has pride enough to drown himself in it, but he does not move in such designs unaided. This is not a lord inviting a king to sup. This is a noose being braided with blessed thread. "Guessed right," Tyrion murmured. "Bread and salt. An old song." "The very oldest," Varys said. "So old that some are sure it has been forgotten. That is when songs are most dangerous." Tyrion let the letter fall to the desk. The wax blob gave a soft hollow sound against the parchment. He watched the candle stub lean a little in its pewter dish, the flame bowing toward its own end. He had told himself many things since he had been made hand in all but name, things about the games one had to play to keep a mad boy king from burning his own palace, things about necessary cruelties. He pictured Robb Stark in a hall hung with wolf banners, the lad's youth worn down to a keen edge, and for a moment he saw his own brother Jaime at that age with a sword too bright for any room. Then he saw a hall filled with the bodies of boys and graybeards, the white knife of the north stained red, harps stilling in slick hands. The music will be very fine. He closed his eyes and saw Sansa, who was all quiet feathers and held breath, a sparrow who had learned to wear a falcon's patience. Her hand had been so small on his sleeve the day he told her he would do what he could and meant it. He saw Catelyn Stark's long face drawn taut by grief until it became a cord itself. He thought of his father's mouth, that thin line, the color of old coins. He burned the letter over the candle and watched it stand at last on one black spine before it fell in on itself. "If there's any justice," he said, It would come sooner than wedding music. In my experience, Varys replied, justice and music are both more reliable at a distance. Tyrion stood. His leg was aching. It always ached when weather turned or plans did. Then we'll have to bring justice closer, he said. He picked up a quill and dipped it. I need riders who know the Riverlands better than their own mothers' faces. I need a purse deep enough to make owls sing like larks. I need a message that will not be caught in the wrong branch. He paused. And I need to leave this city without my father's shadow seeing which lamp has gone out. Bronn will say it is foolishness, Varys observed. He will not be wrong. Then we shall give him cause to name it something else, Tyrion said. Let him call it a wager. I have coin enough to stake my life on it. You mean to go yourself? Varys tilted his head. That is brave. I am a Lannister, Tyrion said, and smiled despite how his stomach turned. We do not send apologies by proxy. He wrote the first letter to a man he had once beaten at Syvas in a tent plastered with stains and girls' laughter, a camp follower's warren that happened to harbor one of the best eyes with a longbow in the Riverlands. He wrote the second to a septon whose sermons often included reminders that men cowl. Sin with the hand that inked a letter as surely as with the hand that held a knife. He wrote the third to himself, care of the inn at the crossroads, because if one wished a message to go astray in the right way, there were few safer havens than that gallows post of a place wherein fortunes turned and turned and turned. He sent for Podrick Payne. Pod shuffled in, hair standing up like bristle from his head, eyes at once earnest and terrified. We are going for a ride, Tyrion told him. Where? Pod said. His voice cracked, to his mortification. Tyrion watched him blush and felt something like fondness for the lad that had as much to do with how he held a candle as how he held a sword. A little way north, Tyrion said, where the roads choose each other and no one can say who asked who to dance. Pod blinked. That's very clear, my lord. Good, Tyrion said. Bring a cloak that can be forgiven for looking like it slept in the gutter. Bring a sword without jewels. Bring the purse under my bed and none of the carpets stolen by my housemaids. Bring courage. If you find any of that last, share it. They left by the mud gate at dawn 2 days later with the fog making a low country of the harbor. Bronn rode with them as far as the King's Road's first bend, where he turned his horse with that shrug of his that made his shoulders into the words he did not bother to say. You owe me a drink if you come back, Bronn said. And I'll need coin if you don't. You'll have both, Tyrion told him, and then for a moment, because it might have been goodbye, he reached up and put a hand to Bronn's knee. If the city burns, leave it, Bronn. Leave it and don't look back. There's nothing in those stones that will love you as much as your purse. I never thought otherwise, Bronn said and grinned. Try not to get killed by your own blood. It's bad for the liver. They rode hard because Tyrion could not bear to ride otherwise. The world narrowed to hooves and damp breath and the shapes of trees that appeared suddenly and fled behind. They slept in thickets with the horses cropping near at hand, and woke with pine needles clinging to hair. Tyrion's legs nodded. Pod snored softly, a boy's sound, and woke ashamed of it. Once, men in rag pellets drifted out of the wood like leaves all the wrong color, and Tyrion's coin turned their eyes back to their own hunger. Another time, a raven crossed the road at dusk, dragging something gray and limp from its beak, and Tyrion thought of ravens carrying wedding invitations and shook as if the night were colder than it was. The Riverlands showed their wounds and did not pretend to be anything else. Fields gone to thistle and black stubble. Orchards with the fruit rotting on branches because the hands that should have taken them had other work now. Burying suns, boiling leather. Villages with only smoke because even the flames had eaten all there was to feed them. At the inn at the crossroads the sign was new. A fresh coat of white paint was not enough to keep the old hanging from showing through like bones. A road and a road again, crossed into a notch, and the face of a stranger peering down from the eaves with rain carving trails in his mud. Tyrion took a table in the back where the wall met itself and waited, and altered the angle of his goblet and waited again. He thought of a girl in a torn dress once, and of how his capture had begun in these beams, and he did not smile at the justice of it. justice and music, both better at a distance. The first to come was the man with the good bow. He might once have been handsome. War had carved a map of little wounds into his cheeks. He kept his hood up. "You lost that game by a pawn," he said without greeting, and sat. "You forget the late move with the dragon," Tyrion said. "I am surprised you remember anything but the bottle. One does not forget a lord who pays for the singing he asks for." The man's eyes flicked to Podrick, to the purse on the table, back to Tyrion. "Angui will take silver for good shot. He takes gold to put an arrow in a sermon." "I do not need a preacher killed," Tyrion said. "I need a message that will fly faster than a raven and land more softly than one." Angui grunted. "Bird work, then." "Where?" "Riverrun," Tyrion said. "Into the hands of a man who swims as easily as he fights. Old fish, black fish." "Brynden Tully," Angui said. I can put an arrow where a thought will find it." The second came at night, when only the men who smelled of wet wool and fear were still at their wine. A septon, or the clothes of one anyhow, gray and frayed, the collar stained with the intimacy of many necks. He smiled. He smelled of incense and onions. He took Tyrion's coin and left a blessing behind like a draft. The third was not the person it was addressed to. The inn did these things itself. Tyrion left a note in a floorboard where no one had put a note in years. That was not the important thing. The important thing was that when a boy unlaced it to read, his eyes would widen just as much as if the parchment had been for him, because the inn read all its letters to itself first and then decided where they should truly go. It would find its way along a crooked path of ears and careful debts to a camp where wolf banners tried to keep the rain off of men who talked like stone. They had to wait then, and waiting had teeth. Tyrion kept moving because it felt like safety disguised as exhaustion. He moved through the woods and along the roads, and on a river in a flat-bottomed boat where the water smelled of iron and cattails, and farther north. He met men with little banners on spears, new-made things that had not learned yet what it was to lose, and he met men whose banners had turned to rags and who bragged anyway, telling their own deeds as if repetition would feed them. He heard from a wagon driver that a wolf king's mother had thrown him from a tower to keep him out of the rye. And he heard from a milkmaid that the same king had grown a second head with antlers and had married a bear. He smiled and listened to all of it because when people lied about kings they were often telling the truth about what kings did to them. On a morning cold enough to remind him of the Ares stones, Tyrion looked up and saw gray soldiers fanning the far side of a meadow, their faces turned toward him and not good-humored about it. He drew rein before the point of a spear that would consider itself lucky if it went through a Lannister. Pod stopped a breath later and tried not to stare at the sigil painted on a kite shield. A trout leaping. Brynden Tully detached himself from the others as easily as if he had simply decided to become more alone. The man carried silence around him like a well-woven cloak. "Lord Tyrion," the Blackfish said. He made the title sound like a question he already knew the answer to. "If you came to take another piss in a river, you are not welcome." "Blackfish," Tyrion said. "I had hoped for your nephew." "You hoped for a good many improbable things," Brynden Tully said. "Robb Stark does not meet Lannisters at noon in meadows. He meets them when it suits him." "I have no desire to choose the hour," Tyrion said. "Merely the day." The trout veteran regarded him. His face was made of rock and patience. Crows hopped along the meadow's edge, bold enough to be men who had forgotten how to be frightened. "Speak," Brynden Tully said, as if words were rations to be handed out one per man. Tyrion spoke. He did not show the letter. He could not have, for the letter was ash. He showed Varys words instead, and the smell of music. He showed angles, not pleas. He spoke of Roose Bolton's letters sent by pale hands, and of men in fry colors riding hard for Harrenhal with smiles that did not touch their eyes. He spoke the names of minor frays like stringing beads, half the strength of persuasion lying in the fact that he knew these petty men's petty hungers. He did not say how many of them had turned up in the whorehouses of King's Landing. He did not need to. He told Brynden Tully there would be bread on the tables and salt in the bowls, and there would also be knives under the salt and men to use them. He did not say this was how his father thought. He didn't have to. The blackfish did not blink at the mention of betrayal or bread. He listened the way old trees listen to wind, remembering the shape of it because they have stood in it every year. When Tyrion had done speaking, Brynden said, "If this is true, your head ought to go back to your father in a sack." "That is the most convincing argument against my telling you," Tyrion said. "And yet here we are." Brynden looked past him to Pod, whose hands had not stopped their nervous worrying of his reins. "The boy rides like a squire," he said, "which is sensible because that is what he is." He leaned a little closer. "Can you put a knife in your father?" "No," Tyrion said steadily, "but I can keep him from putting his knife in you." The blackfish's mouth made a very small movement that might, in a man with more time for grievance than for humor, have been the beginning of a laugh. "You will say the king must hear this," he said. "You will say you came yourself because you would not trust a bird, and you will ask us to trust you instead." "You listen well," Tyrion said. "Do you suppose he will?" "The boy I knew had thick sense," Brynden Tully said. "The king I know has had most of it starved out of him by need." He turned and gestured. Men loosened their grips on their spear shafts without quite relaxing. "Come then. If you mean to toss stones in the trident, we might as well tell the river first." They blindfolded him in courtesy, which is to say they blindfolded him so that if he lived and was set loose the path would not come back to him in dream. He smelled river mud and wet horse and men who had not known soap in months. When they pulled the cloth away he was looking up at the walls of Riverrun, buttresses like knuckles, towers like men who had forgotten to sit. Robb Stark stood under the wolf banner. He looked like what Tyrion had expected and did not. He was taller than Tyrion's memory had made him and thinner, and the weight he had lost had settled into his eyes and turned them into things one could cut one's fingers on. Catelyn Stark stood at her son's left hand. Her grief was a presence, a third person, something that spoke without words. Edmure Tully bristled, as men bristle when they know the world has named them younger brothers too many times. The blackfish had the grace not to look at Tyrion in triumph. Roose Bolton stood a little apart, the color of water you'd rather not drink. His eyes were chips of cloud and something colder still. The Dreadfort's flayed man hung in a corner of the hall, an emblem unhung as much as possible in Catelyn Stark's presence, and yet always there if one tilted the head. "You stand in a hall where my kinsman was stolen from me," Catelyn said by way of greeting. "Begin with that debt in mind." "I do," Tyrion said. "Do you also remember a knife at my throat and a trial in the Eyrie? Shall we weigh old arguments, Lady Stark? If we do, there will be no scales left when the song starts." Robb raised a hand. Authority came to him awkwardly yet. It did not fit him as well as armor or a cloak, and one felt he might shrug it off if it got in his way. "Speak," he said. "You did not come to trade old insults." Tyrion told them. He did not ask them to trust him until he had given them something to hold. From his cloak he drew a scrap of cloth his hand had worried soft as silk on the ride, pale gray with a thread of pink at the edge where it had been torn from a larger piece. He laid it on the table. Roose Bolton did not look at it. The flayed man on the far wall seemed to. "From a courier caught at Quiet Isle," Tyrion said, watching Bolton's face and finding little there to watch. "Your lord here is an excellent commander. He is also a patient deceiver. A rare combination. My father appreciates rare things." Catelyn's fingers had crept to the cloth. She touched the pinked edge and left it where it lay, as if the thing might leap if it felt trapped. "You mean to say," she murmured, "that Walder Frye and Roose Bolton will break bread with us and then break us?" "I mean to say my father will have it done," Tyrion said, "and that if you go to the twins in supplication you will not return except in songs sung out of season." Roose Bolton was very still. "It is a pity," he said, "when men weave tapestries of rumor and panic, because they are always disappointed when they find the cloth will not hold. If Lord Tyrion says his father hates us, we shall not disagree. If he says Lord Walder is a little man with a great desire to stand on necks, we shall nod. But if he says the Lord of the Dreadfort takes orders from the Lord of Casterly Rock, We shall smile and forgive him the fancies that come to men who do not keep their sleep. Brynden Tully's mouth twitched. Catelyn's eyes, red about the edges and bright near the pupils, flitted from Bolton to her son. Robb looked at Tyrion. "Why?" he said simply. "Why this warning? Why not let us die and be done with us?" "My father has many gifts," Tyrion said. "He has no gift for mercy. If the slaughter is done, it will not be called slaughter. It will be the removal of a piece from a board, a necessary move for a stable realm. You are a boy to him. Your death will be filed under mathematics." He spread his hands. "I do not love you. I do not hate you enough to make myself the sort of man who can listen to a harp over your mother's body and call it policy." "Then you would betray your father," Bolton said. "Because your conscience pricks at the tone of a lute." "Because I am tired," Tyrion said quietly, "of being my father's clever dog. Because there is a girl in King's Landing who wears your blood, and I would not see her more broken than she is. Because if the wolf dies this way, then the realm learns a law I do not wish to live under. Because—" he raised an eyebrow. "I am small enough that I have to choose my shadows. His is very cold." Robb's jaw worked. He looked at his mother. Catelyn Stark's face said nothing anyone could eat. At last the young king inclined his head a fraction. "If this is a trap," he said, "there are better ones ahead that will shut on you. If it is not—" "If it is not," Tyrion said, "you will avoid a song, which is the best thing a man at war can do." "I will not go to the twins," Robb said to no one and everyone. "Let Lord Walder keep his grudges. I have another bridge. Lord Freybegg's parley? He may wait at the foot of my walls for it." He turned to Roose Bolton. "Lord Bolton, you will ride east to guard the marches near the Green Fork. I will have reports thrice a day. You will send me men you trust to the marrow. Men whose eyes you'd wager on in your sleep." He did not raise his voice. Quiet made his words sharper. "And I will have their names." Bolton bowed. "Your grace is wise to distrust the world," he said. "I shall guard the fords as if my own skin were on them." Robb looked to Tyrion again. "This leaves me with an enemy who rides in my west with half the gold in the world and friends enough to call them Westerlands. What do you bring me against that besides old letters and a bad conscience?" "Another enemy for him," Tyrion said, "if you will have it. And a sister." Catelyn's eyelids flickered. "Arya is—" "I cannot promise Arya," Tyrion said. He clamped hard on the ache of it. The little wolf was a rumor that would not settle into more than tracks and a whiff of woods. But Sansa is in a cage lined with gold, and that is exactly the sort of cage that breaks. I can bring her to you. He felt how the room altered around that. The air thinned. "And I can pry one more slat from my father's house." "How?" Robb said, and it did not sound like hope, merely like hunger waking and deciding it might yet choose a road. "With coin," Tyrion said. "With a little wildfire. With a little lie. With the truth. Not in that order." He put both hands on the table. "Your Grace, give me riders who know what a quiet hoof is. Give me men who can pluck a girl from a rock without tipping the whole cliff into the sea. Give me a thing you have more of than the men in King's Landing do. Honor all bound up in a rag. We will make the city look at it and see a banner." "What do you wish me to do?" Robb asked. "While you pretend to be a bird." "Be a wolf," Tyrion said. "But not at the twins." They made a plan because that is what men do when they have nothing else to stand on. It was a plan that depended on things men had scarce commodity of: trust and timing and fools to carry messages through worlds built for killing them. Tyrion found himself speaking more than he slept. He found himself looking at Roose Bolton and trying to decide if men like that had ever loved anything in the world except the satisfaction of quietly getting what they wanted. He found Jane Westerling there, Robb's golden-headed bride whose presence was the stone in Lord Walder's shoe, and he thought for a moment of Shay and then thought no more, because thoughts came with a cost he could not afford just then. The riders were chosen. The purses were tied and retied. The truths were sorted from the lies until the lies wore their own faces and the truths went disguised. "Bring her," Catelyn said to Tyrion by the river the morning he left again, and her voice had dropped to that place where words were stone. Bring my girl. I'll need a boat, Tyrion told her. A fast one, and a man on it who owes no one anything. A man who would rather sleep than talk. I will bring your girl. Bring her, Catelyn repeated. She stared not at him, but past him at the water's slick skin. Took Tyrion 2 breaths to realize she was praying. With her eyes open, he went south like a small storm trying to get past a larger one. He went wrapped in a Septon's cloak and under a hood that gave him the air of a man who had discovered humility was a better coat than pride. He went with men who unrolled their map over the ground each morning and looked at it as if it had learned something new in the night. At the rush he hired a boat from a man whose face was so plain it erased itself from memory as one watched it. I can keep my oars quiet, the man said without boasting, as if explaining the weather. I know where reeds grow like ears. King's Landing came up out of the stench as always, as if a carcass could grow spires. The walls were dotted with men whose spears made a forest one would not wish to walk in. The mud gate's teeth glistened. Tyrion stared at it from the low shadow of his boat and felt, for a moment, the full weight of being a small man in a large place. He did not go by the gate. The city was like the sea. If one did not wish to be swallowed by the breakers, one entered where it had forgotten to be itself. There were drains and culverts enough to drown in. There was a postern that belonged to a cellar that had belonged to a wine merchant before he had gone empty. Podrick went first because he was better at squeezing and because his fear kept him from making noise. Tyrion went next, stifling a curse when his foot sank to the ankle in a blackness that might once have been vegetables. The boatman, who had agreed to wait, agreed to do so again without the need of coin. Tyrion did not trust men who would not name their price, but there are times when the unpriced thing buys itself. He made his way to the Tower of the Hand by a path long enough to break a straighter man. He used shadows that were acquainted with his shape. He used a stare that he had bribed to forget him. He used Varys. The spider was waiting with a slicer's smile. You smell of river, he murmured, and opened a cabinet where sweets ought to be and revealed instead a coil of green rope with rings in it. No rope, not even rope. Thin glass bellies with sin curled into them. Wildfire slept nastily, like a cat that wakes with claws. Not enough to scorch the world, Tyrion said. Just enough to make a freeman think twice about drawing breath under the wrong eave. You have a talent for making catastrophe seem like housekeeping, Varys said. She is in the godswood. Tyrion paused. In the? Do you suppose one can keep a bird forever under cloth? Varys' smile might have been scorn. It turned sideways and was simply sad. She slips the guards every 3rd day. Sparrows no hedges, and she knows how to move with the breath of trees. Then let us be trees, Tyrion said. Sansa had always been at her safest when no one knew how much she knew. She walked bent a little under the gravities of men's expectations, and thus no one thought to look up into the leaves. She started when Tyrion spoke her name. That was because it was easier to start than to show how often she had been listening for it. Lord Tyrion, she said, and her mouth tried an old version of a smile and gave it up. I am not allowed here. I am not allowed many places, Tyrion said. We will break a few small laws together and use them to outrun the large ones. She glanced around as if the weirwood might send a raven to blab. My lady aunt taught me verses, she said, choosing her words with care. I am very good at standing still and thinking of water. Good, Tyrion said. You'll need both talents. Can you leave what you have and take what you are? Your shoes, a cloak, nothing else. Leave your hair behind too if you must. We can buy new hair. She looked at him. Why? It was the question of a girl who had had, because men say so, as an answer too many times. Because your mother wants you, he said, and watched the question fall away from her like a shell, leaving the raw, bright thing that had been inside it. If he could have given her back her childhood and a summer to spend it in, he would have. He could not do that. He could take her out of a cage. Servants never saw what was carried in baskets when baskets were carried confidently. That was the first law of gilded houses. The second was that the best lies were told by walls, because walls never looked away. Tyrion and Pod carried a hamper of half-rotten flowers from the gods' wood between them and muttered about how the hand's wife would have their ears if the stinks weren't removed. Pod had a gift for looking ill-provided for and angry about it. Sansa had a gift for being dead still without being dead. Tyrion had coin enough to skate his eyes past anyone who wanted to be paid to look elsewhere. Varys moved in a line so straight their lies curved around him. They descended into the city's throat. The smell was the sort that made eyes water out of self-preservation. They slid Sansa into the boat like a secret, and the boatman pushed off as if he were simply tired of a dock. The night lifted its hem and showed a star. Tyrion's heart pounded in his throat. A torch flared on the wall. A voice called. Tyrion's fingers brushed the wildfire rope. He did not light it. Pod looked at him, waiting to be told to be brave so he could. The torch dimmed. The voice became something else. The boat slid under the shadow of an arch, and the world narrowed to the scrape of the oarlocks and the river's long, slow exhale. They put in at a reed bed where frogs had more to say than men. Sansa came up out of the hamper like someone returning from underwater. She did not cough. She took a breath as if she were not sure she remembered how. Tyrion offered her a hand. "We will ride by night," he said. "We will keep the day for sleeping and listening." She nodded. She was paler than he had ever seen. Her hair was tucked up under a cap that had been made for a boy. She did not look like a boy. She looked like someone who had learned a boy's rules back. The girls' rules had been written with chains. They rode. They learned the particular terror of owls. They learned how a horse's breath can warm a man's hands better than a fire, when a fire would be an announcement that foolish men were near. They learned that when a girl leaves a city that has tried to break her, the air itself feels different, as if it has been waiting for this disappearance since it began blowing. Pod clung to his saddle and kept glancing back with a fierceness that embarrassed him. Twice they were nearly undone by chance. Once by a wagon laden with barrels of tar, which would have been eager to demonstrate how they felt about wildfire, and once by a group of outlaws who would have salted a king if he fit in a bag. Tyrion paid for their lives with silence and silver and, once, with a joke he dared not repeat to Catelyn Stark. Sansa smiled at nothing at all whenever she let her mind walk ahead of them to the place where her mother stood. They came up on Riverrun like exhausted birds dropping out of poor weather. The gate rose. The trout banners hung with an air that might have been companionship if one were generous. Men who had been at war long enough to take no pleasure in recognizing anyone recognized a king's sister instead and made their mouths into shapes that meant something again. Catelyn met them in the yard. She did not run. She moved with the care of a woman carrying hot water in a cold house. When she reached Sansa, she simply put her hands on her daughter's cheeks and then folded the girl to her as if she had been waiting a decade with her arms held out. Tyrion, who had spent his life watching people kiss other people's rings, looked away. He took the cup Brynden Tully pressed into his hand and drank half of it without tasting it. "You have put a blade in your father's hand and turned it around," the Blackfish said to him. "Men will tell that story in two ways, and both will make you less than you are." "I will pour wine into my ear to keep from hearing them," Tyrion said. "A clever answer." Brynden's smile was a scar. "Now we will do the less clever thing. We will wait, and we will watch who cannot help showing us their teeth." Roose Bolton showed his by not showing them. A raven came from the east with a message about the Green Fork, about skirmishers melting and reforming like rain, about fords held and then yielded by plan. Robb Stark sent back praise in doses too small to taste and a demand for more names. He sent men who answered to Mal Lister and men who answered to Umber to stand at his right hand and see that what had been promised was indeed what was happening. Roose sent back a letter smooth as milk. The fords were yeah, the scouts nay, the fog helpful, the old roads untrustworthy friends. He sent back a man named Went, who had eyes like the gaps between teeth. Tyrion sat at councils and said little because every word he spoke was a calculated coin. He watched Edmure fuss and puff himself and then take a wound from his uncle's eyebrow as easily as a child takes a scraped knee and cries because someone is looking. He watched Catelyn come back to herself by degrees, as if each time she set her hand on Sansa's hair she reclaimed some small piece of her mind that had been walking in bleak places. He watched Robb weigh maps and men and the weight of a thing that could not be seen yet, for winter was being itself along the rooflines and in the fields, a fact no one could look full in the face while they were busy not dying. The day news came that Ramsay Snow had taken Winterfell and that the Ironborn were a stain and a story. A silence fell like an axe edge. It was not a new story. It was only officially true now. Robb put his fist to the table and left a mark and moved on. Tyrion watched him and thought, in a moment of bitter clarity, that if the boy survived this, he would be something worth either kneeling to or killing. The net tightened around Bolton in the way that nets do where many hands make a small tug feel like much. It was not that he was caught. It was that all exits began to look the same from where he stood. A courier going west was pulled off a horse near Pink Maiden and found to be carrying a wedge of cheese and a wedge of wax. The cheese went to men who had forgotten butter. The wax was melted and revealed a strip of vellum with orders written in a hand too clean to be anyone's who had ever missed a night's sleep. When the wolf moves to the twins, the flayed man bares its teeth. Robb held the vellum as if it had been a living thing he had to keep from slithering away. He did not shout. He sent for Bolton and looked at him for a long time across a table where there was a candle and a knife and the war. "You are a brave man to stay," Robb said. "I am a loyal one," Bolton answered. "It is a duller quality, but I find it keeps a man warmer." "Do you mean to deny this?" Robb asked, lifting the vellum a little. The wax had seeped into the wood and left a pale scar when they freed the message. "I mean to suggest your grace has more interesting enemies," Bolton replied. His eyes were soft with fatigue. "I mean to suggest that while we sit and name each other, we will be outnamed by men who move." Robb's hand, very slightly, tightened on the knife. Catelyn's gaze slid along the room like a blade looking for a neck. Tyrion held his breath because the smell of becoming murder was in the air, and he wanted to learn whether it smelled the same as other kinds he had known. Bolton did not flinch. He did not lick his lips. He did not run. He stood and let his face be a thing men would have to guess at. Robb put the letter sideways on the table and did not draw the blade. "Go east," Robb said. "You are best used at distance, Lord Bolton." "Your grace is right," Bolton said. His voice never warmed. "That is where I belong." He bowed and left the room with the same quiet he had brought into it. "He will not go far east," Bryndentull said after a moment. "Men like that never go where the map says. They go to the place between maps." "Then we will meet him there," Robb said. The Freys sent their couriers. The couriers were asked to wait outside. The Freys sent their letters. The letters were read aloud and then read again to see if the sound of them changed. Tyrion pointed with his finger at a turn of phrase that had the humble scent of Lord Walder's ruthlessness. Catelyn took the letter and put it in her lap as if it were a small animal she was deciding whether to feed. In the end, Robb wrote once, and the letter was so precise in its courtesy it might have bled anyone trying to pick it up by the wrong edge. He did not go to the twins. He moved instead through river fog to the crossroads and then further to Lord Harroway's town, the drowned skeleton of a place that still pretended to be a town when men needed towns. He went where men had lost count of how many times kings had camped in those meadows and explained pebbles to the river with their blood. Tywin moved from Harrenhal like a storm that had been told to keep its hands clean. The red and gold poured out and turned the fields into tapestries. The air thickened with the sound of orders. Tyrion opened the green bellies of alchemist's glass on a night when there was no wind to carry a spark to the wrong ear. He anchored barrels in the slow parts of the river with rope dipped in river silt. He whispered to a man with a voice like a struck bell, and the man took a dozen good archers to places no one would think to look because no one had loved those places in 300 years. He shared wine with the Brotherhood without telling them his name and woke to find they had gone and left him a roast rabbit and a feather. He slept when his bones demanded it and woke when the ground did. The battle did not begin at dawn. That would have been polite. It began in the hour before dawn when men are as brittle as glass. It began with a horn that stretched the world like leather until it snapped. It began with horses breathing frost and men's mouths full of prayers salted with old oaths. It began with umber laughter because the great John could not go into any fight without being rude to the day. It began with the Lannisters' banners rising like someone had thrown blood into the sky. Robb stood on a little rise where he could see rivers of men flowing toward each other and the place where they wanted the water. He didn't look like a boy at all. He looked like someone outside himself, watching with the same curiosity he showed looking at a puzzle board, and for a second Tyrion wondered what he would have been if he had been allowed to be anything. Then the archers began to sing, and he remembered that what men are allowed to be is often chosen by other men's lungs and fingers. Tyrion could not be everywhere. He could be where a choice needed to be made and then made again. He rode with a small guard through churned mud to where the river narrowed and then spread its skirts like a girl having had her fill of dancing. He saw the first Lannister vanguard put their horses into the water and felt a part of himself try to stand between them and drowning. He stepped on that part and told it to be silent. He heard the hiss as one of the anchored barrels was clipped by a misplaced spear and saw the green smoke lick out with a cat's laziness. He held his breath. It did not catch. He grinned like a skull. The Lannister host stretched long and elegant when it should have bunched. That was his father's grace. He could make order pleasing to the eye even when it killed men. Robb's wolves did not meet them in the water. They let the red men pant and haul and make the crossing, and then when they had committed themselves as a man commits himself to a lie by telling it in public, the wolves came. The Grachan's bellow sounded like a house falling down. The Malisters came in from the left like a tide that had known the shore all its life. The Frey levies, few of them here because Lord Walder had chosen to be difficult and wise, did as much as they had to and no more. Angui's first green-lit arrow lit the river. It lit the night's breath. It lit the thought in 50 men's minds at once. I am standing in the wrong place. Wildfire rolled like an old god turning over. It had not been set to kill an army. Tyrion would not have the deaths of thousands on that conscience, and besides, he was a practical man. One killed armies with other armies. The wildfire had been set to frighten horses and interrupt plans and make men decide not to be brave right now. It did all those things better than any speech. The Lannister ford became a decision no one wanted to make. Tyrion's eyes found the lion standard in the press where it mattered. His father kept to the rear on a height as was his place. He did not ride into the ford and drown like a hero. He rode along its edge and cut the measure of men with his gaze and sent more where men were failing. He was not drawn to the brightest place. He rode to where it would matter 1 hour from now. Watching him, Tyrion might have loved him if love had not been turned out of him early and told to find lodging elsewhere. On the north bank Roose Bolton appeared and disappeared as fog does when the ground is warmer than the air. He held the green fork in a way that looked orderly and safe, and yet each time the Lannisters probed there the resistance gave just enough to be concerning and then steadied. Tyrion's mouth twisted. Whatever else Bolton was, he was no fool in the field. The fighting turned ugly and ordinary then. It lost its shape. Men who had imagined themselves banners in paintings learned what banners were for, which was to tell men where to die looking the right way. Tyrion rode and made 3 small choices that saved 30 men, and one that cost him 20, and he did not forget those faces. He had never had the luxury of believing men were numbers. The Ildfire burned itself into sullen green smoke and left a taste in the air like burned herbs. It should not have turned then. It should have become one of those battles men stagger out of and cannot say who won. It turned because a boy too young to shave put a horn to his mouth at the foot of the hill where Tywin had made his post and blew the old sound of the first men, which is a ridiculous thing in any army modern enough to wear plate. It turned because for a few heartbeats men remembered that they had not invented all the ways of killing and that some of the old ones were worse. It turned because the horse under Tywin Lannister, truth be told, no horse loved that man, threw him when a shaft meant for the banner behind him went into its ear, and the Lord of Casterly Rock found himself abruptly a man on his back with his men a little too far away to keep from seeing it. Tyrion led his horse hard toward that pivot without choosing to. He arrived in time to see 3 Mallister men go down under a gold tide, and to see the great John Bull through it like the answer to a riddle no one had understood they were being asked. Tywin was on his feet by then, and his face when he saw his second son would keep Tyrion warm on nights without blankets. It was not surprise. His father did not waste his face on surprise. It was calculation shading toward contempt, shading toward something like acceptance that the world was a thing even he could not keep from throwing odd dice. "Father," Tyrion said. He had meant to say nothing, but the word fell out of his mouth without permission, a habit of a lifetime finding its way to daylight. Tywin did not answer. He did not have to. He drew his sword and the man with him, a squire too eager to die a knight, put himself between his lord and the great Jon and was removed from existence like a smudge from a page. Tywin gave orders then, and the gold around him bowed to the music of his voice. The thing about music is that sometimes someone throws a stone at the harp. Brynden Tully came up from the river with men of Riverrun on his shoulders and went at the gold flank like a fisherman chopping ice. Roose Bolton's riders, who had been coy, ceased to be coy. They did not ride at Tywin. They rode at the space to the left that Tywin would need in 3 breaths if he were to get free. They removed it. Tyrion's horse refused a step, and he cut at its neck with his heel, and it obeyed. And he found himself suddenly within 5 horse lengths of his father and nowhere to go but forward or down. He broke his good knee against a stirrup and swore, and would later wake in the night with the pain of it like a memory of a friend. Tywin Lannister did not give ground until he had to, and when he had to he did it in a way that looked like someone giving commands to a carpentry. Men obeyed because he had taught them to. And then a cudgel that had once been a wagon stake came out of the smoke and hit him across the ribs, and he folded in a way one did not see and remain unastonished. He was not a young man. Even lions' bones learn their age. It was not Tyrion who took him. It was not Robb. It was not some northern prince whose names men would carve into tankards. It was a woman with bare arms and a plate down her back who had lost 3 sons, and who understood that this man had taken them as surely as if he had chosen their names himself. She struck him in the knee, and he went down, and then 3 men were on him, and then 10, and the sword went out of his hand because a man knocked it, not because Tywin let it go. They bound him in chain and blood and insult. For a bare moment, at the end, his eyes found Tyrion's over the backs of men. They spoke all the words the two had never been willing to, and none at all. Tyrion looked away first because he understood, as he always had, that looking first had saved his life in rooms no one had noticed. The battle ended the way battles end. Slowly, reluctantly, with arguments between bodies about whether it was time to stop. Men shouted that the Lord of Casterly Rock was taken. Men shouted other things. Some voices did not stop shouting even when their mouths had nothing left in them to push. The river brought pieces of men to places their mothers would never see. Robb Stark stood under a sky that, ignorant of victory, had decided to be beautiful for its own purposes. He looked older by a decade and younger by a year. They brought Tywin to a tent that did not belong to him. He was not bruised enough to be satisfied by, but bruises do not satisfy anyone with a real grievance. The chain at his wrists made a small sound that would have sounded like a kitten in a warmer place. Catelyn went to the entrance and looked in and then away. Brynden Tully went in and came out 5 minutes later with his face more neutral than stone. Roose Bolton looked in from a remove and did not show even that much. Tyrion went in last. He had to duck, which made him think of 100 jokes he was in no mood to laugh at. Tywin sat on a stool as comfortably as if it had been carved for him, because his sense of comfort was not quite the same as other men's. It had less to do with softness and more to do with placement. "You," Tywin said. "Yes," Tyrion said. "You did this?" Tywin said. Tyrion felt his mouth dry. He drank from the cup at his belt, water hot as blood. "Not alone. That is the one thing you could have said to disappoint me less," Tywin said. His eyes moved around the tent, locating weaknesses, counting men he could not see. "Is this a Stark victory or a Tully one?" "It was a river's," Tyrion said, "and a woman's, and a boy's horn, and an accident, and a plan." He spread his hands, feeling the ache move up his arm. "It was a day. Men will write poems about it," Tywin said. "They always do." "Not songs," Tyrion said. "I have had enough songs for a while." Tywin's gaze flicked to his wrists. "Will you put me on a cart and display me?" he said, tone flat. "Will you call for a prince to cut my head? Will you bargain with what is mine?" "We will bargain," Tyrion said. "Perhaps not with your head. It is valuable, but it is the sort of currency that spends only once. Tywin's mouth made a shape like the faintest ghost of amusement. You overrate your cleverness if you think your Stark will outlast the season, he said. Winter is a negotiator whose terms no one likes. Your friends will break before they freeze. We will see, Tyrion said. He wanted to ask why this. He had asked it silently every day of his life. He did not ask it now. He said instead, I have your granddaughter. I will keep her safe. Tywin's lids lowered. That girl is a tool, he said. Tools are not kept safe. They are kept sharp. Perhaps, Tyrion said. He found, to his astonishment, that he was no longer frightened of him. He was no longer much of anything. And perhaps men who call their family tools ought to be locked away from them. Tywin leaned back. You were your mother's last joke on me, he said, without rancor. I suppose I ought to admire the thoroughness of it. Admire it in your chain, Tyrion said, and left. There was no end to battles. They metastasized. The capture of Tywin did not cause the Red Keep to hand over its keys and its grudges and decide upon a nice life in the country. News was a three-headed creature. One head reached King's Landing and bit everyone there. One head went west and bit Casterly Rock. And a third went to Highgarden and made a measured old woman put her hand to her mouth and laugh like a girl. Cersei kept a grip on the city like a drowning woman keeps a grip on a mast. Joffrey shouted. Littlefinger whistled to himself and sold the same half-truth to two teams. Varys looked at his spiders and gently touched their legs. The Tyrell plan to marry their blossom to a boy with teeth did not falter. It paused, sniffed the air, and continued, because no garden had ever been afraid of one captured lion when there were still other lions pacing. The phrase, deprived of their great performance, sulked. Walder Frey sent letters that had more bile than ink in them. Robb ignored them with a ferocity that made Tyrion newly fond of the boy. The phrase sent raiders to prove they were not irrelevant. The raiders came home with fewer ears than they left with because Umbermen were feeling musical. Roose Bolton vanished not east but into the sort of letter that said nothing and a shadow in which no one could find him. When he emerged he had done exactly as commanded, and so precisely that it frightened even those who were grateful. Kevan Lannister rode at the head of gold, who did not wish to follow him and made men love him because he did not ask them to. Tyrion considered the possibility that if the gods had spared him a few more inches, he would have liked to be his uncle. He wrote Kevan a letter that said simply, Do not kill yourself for a man who would not put out his candle to keep you alive. He never learned if Kevan read it. They put Tywin under guard in Riverrun and posted men outside his tent who had known hunger long enough to be grateful for something to do. He was no less dangerous in chain than he had been on horseback. There are men whose danger lies in their wrists and men whose danger lies in their tongues. Tyrion kept men away from his father who had not been taught to keep their mouths closed in the presence of wolves. Tywin began to own the space he was given. He rearranged it in his mind and made it his, and by doing so made it less useful to others. Sansa flinched less. She began to spend hours with a sword made of wood, and a woman with an iron mind and a scar over one eye who had stopped being a maid long before the war made words into slurs instead of stations. Sansa bled and smiled because the smile hurt more than the bruise and it felt honest. She sat with her mother at evening and did not say the names of those she missed because she had learned that naming hurts the men who are left. Robb met with men and maps and also with Tyrion, often in tents where wax dripped like fat. They did not become friends. They understood each other. That is rarer. Once, after a session in which they had decided not to decide on two matters and to make a decision on a third for no better reason than that the alternative had too many teeth, Robb loosed the laces at his throat and stared at the tent's ridgepole and sighed. I had thought, he said, that the worst thing about being a king would be men I did not know calling me by a name I had not asked for. It turns out it is hearing my mother cry softly outside my tent and wondering if it is my fault. It is not your fault, Tyrion said, because sometimes the lies mattered most to those who said them. It is your portion. Robb laughed without humor. You will be the death of me, he said, if I allow you to keep talking to me like that. A king with a conscience is a broken axle. Then I shall remind you of the wheel, Tyrion said. If you are Axel and you will be something we can ride far on, and then break at the end when it is decent to do so. Robb looked at him, and for a moment the boy in him and the king in him occupied the same face without quarrel. And Tyrion felt a pang of something that might have been very close to love. The bargain with King's Landing was made of thread and skin. It had to be. Cersei would not treat while she could scream, and scream she did. The Tyrells sent their men to stand smiling outside her door until she had to stop to breathe. Joffrey threatened to cut off his grandfather's head and wear it. The city did not believe in famine yet. Famine believes in cities patiently before cities believe in famine. Tyrion wrote a letter to his sister he never sent, and another to the queen he did, and a third to Varys he handed over with a look that said, "No, not that way." Varys patted his hand and kept the letter anyway. The purple wedding happened regardless of the shape of men's plans. Perhaps it had been seeded months before when Olenna Tyrell had decided her girl would not sleep under a wolf's teeth if it could be helped. Perhaps it was simply the city deciding to have a joke at its own expense. Tyrion was not there to hand Joffrey a cup. He was at Seaguard arranging for ships to see whether the Riverlands remembered how to be useful by sea. He heard about the boy king's death in a hail of contradictory birds that arrived in such a flock they darkened the noon for an hour. Cersei named him murderer anyway. For a moment the old feeling of being the exact size of someone else's convenient lie took him to the ground like a blow. He lay in his tent with canvas snapping in the wind and stared at the nailheads until the feeling passed. Then he stood and went to tell Robb they had just been given both an opportunity and a new education in how the world paid its debts. Sansa was safe from that version of a rope. She had not been in the hall where the purple stains spread. She sat instead at the banks of a river and watched a fish circle, and though of the taste of lemon cake, and hated herself a little for it because there were men on pyres that day whose mothers had never seen a lemon. Tywin sat in his chain and did not waste his time telling anyone they would be sorry. He did not beg. He did not bargain readily. He learned the faces of the men who guarded him and told them the truth about themselves with enough courtesy that they had to decide whether to be angry. He spoke to Catelyn Stark once and told her that if she cut his head off she would have to live with what that made her, and that neither wolf nor lion would be better for the decision. She looked at him the way a woman looks at a wolf outside her door and shut the flap. In the end the realm made a choice for them, as it always does. The Tyrells did not fancy a Cersei entirely without check. Kevin could not keep the West from tearing at itself when the Rock sent out a hum that said its lord was missing. Stannis brooded in the East like thunder learning patience. The North needed itself back. Robb understood that he would have to leave the Riverlands, no matter what they owed him, if he meant to remain a king and not simply the last heir to a song. They made a treaty in a hall whose banners watched more closely than anyone spoke afterward about. They called it the River Treaty because names have to go somewhere. It said, "We will send Tywin back and he will abdicate to his heir in all matters of war, and the West will pay so much gold you will curse my counting of it, and in exchange the North is a kingdom and the Riverlands are their own houses again so long as the Mallisters and Blackwoods and Brackens can be made to agree for 5 winters in a row, which no one has yet contrived to do." It said, "Sansa Stark is not a vine to be grafted. She is a girl who will go where her mother says until she is old enough to say for herself." It said, "If either party breaks this, we will pretend we are surprised." Said, "This will not hold. It might hold long enough." He went to see his father before the exchange because not doing so would have been the same as allowing himself a hole in his own story. Tywin looked at him, not unkindly. That was new. "You will come to Casterly Rock one day and claim it," Tywin said. "No," Tyrion said. "I will go north and drink with a man I did not mean to like." "You will come to the Rock," Tywin said, "because you cannot help yourself. Because your weakness is that you are your father's son wherever you go." Tyrion looked at the chain. He looked at his father's hands. He looked at the tense canvas where a fly was having a small battle with a drop of something it could not lift. "Perhaps," he said, "perhaps the weakness is mine. Perhaps the chain is yours." He stepped out into the day. It smelled of smoke and rye and the first rumors of winter's iron breath. Robb Stark was mounted in the yard, and his cloak stirred behind him. The boy had learned to sit a horse like a man who knew the ground under him might turn to water any minute. You look as if you have been weighing your soul, Robb observed. I found it lighter than I had hoped, Tyrion said. He put a hand to the horse's withers and patted it. When you go north, take twice the food you think you need and then twice again. Winter does not haggle. We will buy it with the summer you gave us, Robb said. He paused. Go careful in the south. The roads there remember betrayal. The north remembers everything, Tyrion said, and surprised himself by how much fondness he felt for the idea. I will send you a barrel of bad wine for your marriage feast. It is an old Lannister custom to present a friend with something one regrets. Robb's smile touched his eyes then. You are too young to be my old friend, he said, but I will allow it. They exchanged Tywin Lannister for coin and paper and promises and things that would sour if left out. He went west, and the west took him like a stone takes back its own dust. He did not die on the cart, to Cersei's frustration, nor on the way, to the Tyrells' disappointment, nor at home, to no one's satisfaction. He lived, and made plans, and deferred his death for a joke the gods had not yet thought up. Tyrion did not go to Casterly Rock. He went to a town where men learned how to walk as if they were not afraid of drowning and persuaded a ship to take him along the coast where the wind is always considering whether to blow small men into the water just to see what sound they make. He went to White Harbor, where Manderley men count their wealth by fish and by spite. He drank with Lord Wyman and resisted the urge to tell him how funny he looked when he laughed. He went to the Wolfswood and met men who had not seen a city in 30 years and did not wish to. He told them that not all men with gold in their hair were thieves. They told him his height did not make him less of a man, and he told them their height did not make them more. In the Dreadfort, men did what the Dreadfort does. That is a story for another hour without light. In the Vale, Lisa Arryn heard that her sister's daughter had returned and made 3 new rules and forgot the 2 before them. In the East, dragons were a sound carried on the wind so faint it could be mistaken for songs children sing to each other to frighten each other for fun. In the Night's Watch, men ate their shoes and called it stew. The world was very large and very small, and men made it so. Sansa learned to put a blade where it would hurt least to everyone later. She learned to read maps, which is to say she learned to read men. She wore her hair cut short for a time because when she looked at herself otherwise she saw a girl in a red cape she no longer wished to remember. Her mother held a court where grief sat in the corner and was not asked to leave. This was a mercy. The Blackfish taught boys to place their feet, and girls too when no one was looking, and sometimes when everyone was. Edmure made 3 mistakes and corrected 2. Arya, somewhere, continued not to be a ghost, which was the only news that came of her. Robb went north with a line of men whose breath smoked as if they were small dragons. He took Deepwood Motte. He took Bear Island's hand and let its women teach his men how to stand with knees bent and eyes open. He went to Winterfell and moved through its bones like a son who had found his father's old coat in a chest. He set a torch to the Ironborn's proud ashes and did not feel triumph so much as a deep tiredness that felt, nonetheless, like his own. In the south, Cersei's grief made her interesting for a little while. Then it made her boring. Littlefinger acquired a wife and then land and then other men's faith, which is the only thing that grows faster than rumor. The Tyrells bloomed. Varys watched. Tyrion returned to the Riverlands when the leaves were down and the ground made that sound under his boots like old songs being stepped on. He ate a stew so bad even he had to admit it to its face. He counted coin with men who had calluses where their childhoods had been. He sat once more with Robb and Catelyn in a hall where the river's sound crept under the door and the fire, smelling of green wood, had to be told several times to keep at its work. "Do you think," Catelyn asked him suddenly that night, "that the gods will forgive us for having made laws to suit ourselves?" Tyrion considered the matter. He turned the cup in his hand and watched the candlelight run along its rim. "If there are gods," he said gently, "I suspect they are too busy making storms to look into men's cups. We will forgive ourselves or we will not." She closed her eyes. "A northern answer," she said, "but not a cruel one." "I have lived with cruelty," Tyrion said. "I have decided to prefer other flavors." Robb's smile was tired. "We will need you again," he said. "You need no one," Tyrion said. "And everyone. That is the trick of that chair you do not have and wear anyway." He stayed long enough to watch Sansa dance once in a room with no music. She moved her feet carefully and pretended to a rhythm which was not there. Tyrion did not clap. He did not say the first thing that came to his mind, which was that she would be a queen of something someday, even if it were only of her own mind. In the months that followed, the realm remembered and forgot, as it always did. The Red Wedding did not happen. Other weddings did. Other slaughters did. A winter came that did not care about treaties. Men discovered that wolves and lions can sometimes share a riverbank if there are bigger teeth to keep them both honest. Men discovered other things. There were whispers from the frost. Fires were fed twice and still went out. The North sent for the South not for coin, but for men, and the South sent them because it remembered a river lit green one dawn and a boy's horn, and because a small man had stood with his hand on an old enemy's bridle and said, quietly, "Let us try something difficult." Some nights, when he had found himself in that smelled of congealed stew and old plays and the faintest ghost of vomit, Tyrion would dream of the letter. He would dream of the line about the music and wake with the taste of ash in his mouth. He would rise and find somewhere to stand where the air moved, and he would think over and over again that one can live a whole life trying not to be one's father and still find that the shape he cast is one's own. He would think that perhaps being a different man is less a plan than a practice. He would pour wine into his ear and keep the stories out. He met Bronn again on a road in the Reach where the grass made the horses sound like whispers. They drank under a tree just off the way and discussed the weather and did not mention war until they had to, which is to say they did not mention it at all. "You look less like a rat and more like a badger," Bronn said, which in his mouth was compliment. "More meat on you and less noise." "You look exactly the same," Tyrion said. "Men who are certain look exactly the same in peace as in war." "Peace," Bronn said, tasting the word. "Is that what this is?" "No," Tyrion said. "It is what we call this so that we can eat and drink and pretend we did not know our enemies' faces." They parted because men always do on roads. Tyrion went on. He wrote letters to places he had not seen. He made a list of debts and burned it, then made another and kept it. He did not go to Casterly Rock. Sometimes he felt its weight on the horizon like a storm waiting to decide where to fall. He did not go. If there are songs in a world like that, they are not often pretty. They are sung under breath. Men hum them while mending tack. Women sing them to children too young to ask what the words mean. Sometimes, in the great halls of the North or the lesser ones of the Riverlands, someone will say after the meat has been served and the ale has loosened just enough tongues, "Tell it the way we tell it." And a singer will stand with a borrowed lute and say in a low voice how there was a wedding that did not happen, and a lion that was captured and went home and found himself in a cage he had built, and a boy who learned to be a king by never taking off the weight of being a son, and a girl who came home to a place that had to learn her name again. And sometimes, when he is drunk enough to surrender to his own foolish desires, a small man in the back of the hall will lift his cup and say, softly, to no one, and a dwarf who forgot whose shadow he stood in for one day, and did something not even his father would think to call clever. No one ever sings the rest right. That is all right. Tyrion has learned it is enough that men live long enough to get the words wrong. He sits by fires that smell of pine when men can afford pine, and he counts the war into spare change and buys new things with it and loses some and wins others, and he sits sometimes with Robb Stark and they talk of roads and fish and things, and they say none of the things one would write on banners. They plan a war with cold and knives and ghosts. They practice at being different men than their fathers. Some days it takes. Other days they fail. But on the days it takes, they drink and say nothing at all, because there is a sort of music that is best listened to with one's mouth closed. And because the only justice in the world worth keeping is the sort that sits quiet and warms your hands. And when the river runs black and then green and then black again, and when men start measuring distance by how long their breath holds in their chests and not by miles, and when there comes fire with a cold heart from the north, those men who are left will say, "There is a shape under things that remembers us, and we plucked at it once. We plucked at it, and the music was very fine. The road west smelled of rot and roses. Tywin Lannister rode at an even pace beneath a sky the color of beaten brass, and the escort of his bannered men kept to their distances as if distance were the last courtesy left to them. Scars darkened his ribs under his velvet. A private map only a few hands had seen, and now even the pain had the decency to be orderly. Behind him, the carts creaked. Ahead, Lannisport's lights would be spread like coins on a table no one else had a right to touch. When the road dipped, he saw the rock crouching over the city and the sea. It had been a lion before lions had names. The breeze brought salt and the steady iron knocking of hammers from the harbor. The watchfires on the seawall seemed fewer. That was new. He marked it and said nothing. A lord who remarked every slack rope taught his house to look for rope before they looked for war. They opened the gate for him at a walk because no one ran at Casterly Rock. He dismounted without help, and if the movement made his breath hitch, there were no men in the yard careless enough with their lives to let their faces tell it. Kevin was there, hair gone to more iron than gold, and Davin with his beard like spilled ale foam. Jenna came down a stair with 3 grandchildren in her skirts and looked at her brother the way a keen housewife looks at a loaf she intends to cut into useful slices. "Brother," Kevin said. "Lords," Tywin returned. Titles in a house were useful things like shutters. In the solar he washed ship dust from his hands, though he had not been near a ship. He spread letters to dry on the table. He listened to Kevin's report and Davin's, and then tore one letter down the seam with 2 fingers. "Walder Frey," he said, crisp as a coin. "Old treachery gone hungry. We will not feed it. Let him bite bones and choke. He thought to dress my victory in a butcher's apron and hand it to me. He will learn I wear another cut of cloth." Davin's mouth twitched. "He is sending his boys everywhere to tell anyone who will hear that the Starks have broken all decency by being alive. Then their being alive is his unpardonable sin," Tywin said. "He will do better than to preach sermons on the subject." He picked up another letter. "Myrcella is safe in Sunspear? Safe as a child in a cage full of snakes," Kevin said. "The Martells speak softly and count to 7 between any 2 breaths they take. But she is not harmed, and Ares Oakhart writes rosy lines about her being beloved of the court. Her safety is the only usefulness I expect of Dorne," Tywin said dryly. "They will not forget Elia, and they will never forgive us. We will not attempt to make them." He put that letter aside. "Cersei, Queen Regent, for a smaller crown than she wanted," Kevin said. "She screams as if lungs were a weapon. The Tyrell girl smiles as if mouths were. Between them the city is lulled and wounded at once. And Joffrey is dead," Tywin finished. "A boy who never learned to close his teeth on his own tongue. A pity he did not choose his mother." He looked at the candle. It had made a saucer of its own tallow. "Tommen will live longer if his voice is not the first thing a room hears. We will send wiser sounds to be heard for him. I will not return to that sty of stones to fix what fire has taught them to be. They will hear us from here. You promised to abdicate all matters of war to your heir," Jenna observed from the window, half amused. It was an interesting word to put to paper. Abdicate. Tywin looked at her. "Words are harness," he said. "One may ride them where one intends if one chooses carefully. I am not riding to King's Landing. I am not holding a sword in my hand when men stare. I am telling my son when to put it down and when to pick it up. The treaty is not a wedding vow." "Which son?" Jenna asked mildly. Tywin did not answer at once. When he did, he took up a fresh quill and wrote Kevan in a hand as clean as a blade. "The one who has never wanted my chair," he said. He set his seal, sent ravens, and went to the western balcony that smelled of sea and salt and very old stone. When he closed his eyes, he saw a woman in a muddy dress bring him down with a length of wood, and he smiled without warmth. He had always expected humiliation might try to purchase him. He had not expected so poor a currency. He let the thought go the way he let a bad servant go, with no words and no wages kept back. In Riverrun, winter light was a sheet thrown over the river. Sansa stood in it and let it lay over her shoulders until it felt like a shawl. She had learned to hold a sword enough to keep a man honest and to put it down before she became one of the haunted boys who carried blades in their sleep. Sometimes, in the hall, She forgot the precise arrangement of men's coats for a moment and remembered a summer crowd, and guilt came like a pin between her shoulders for the treachery of the memory. Other times she went to the godswood and put her hand on the old rough bark and told the tree nothing, because words had to be hoarded. Arya remained a rumor. Dogs bark in dreams, people said, in 100 villages at 100 doors. A small girl with a blade named Needle had been seen 3 days behind any place you asked about. She had been dead, and then she had killed a man who hadn't noticed the knife because it remembered him from another life. She had boarded a ship on the narrow sea and been seen in the same afternoon in a market near Saltpans. Sansa listened to all of it and learned to hold her face as if hope were a thing one could demur politely. Catelyn watched her daughter's absence and presence as if both were wolves she could not decide whether to feed. She had learned a new stillness. It made men step more carefully in her presence than a scream would have. She met with the Blackfish and Edmure and with Robb. She unrolled a map, and the map talked to her in the long paragraphs rivers speak. "Roose," Brynden said, flat, tapping the eastern marches. "He does exactly what he's told, like a sinner who has misread the book and intends to obey every page of it regardless. That is the part that keeps me from sleeping. Men who obey too carefully are always planning something else with the hand behind their back." Robb rubbed at his temple as if something had been drawn there in coal. "We need him where he can be watched without being offended by the watching. If I send him to the Dread Fort, I make him comfortable. If I keep him here, I invite him to study our eyes. If I send him to the east, he hangs scraps of himself on trees and calls it guarding." "Send him to the rills," Catelyn said quietly, and the men turned to her. "Give him mud and distance and little glory. Wild men to harry and marsh to swallow letters. Give him work that can be done truly or done slyly. Then watch which he chooses." Brynden's eyebrow shifted the width of a grain. "He will choose the sly, and we will have our answer. Or he will choose the true, and I will sleep," Catelyn returned. Robb nodded once. "Then the rills he shall have." He set his fingertip to the map and dragged a path. "We cannot afford to put our eyes on him and forget north. Winterfell will not grow itself from ashes. The Umbers are loud, but they work. The Manderleys are slow, but they work. There are boys in the Bar Rolands who put axes under their blankets as if metal were warmth. I do not want to leave the river." "You cannot be king in 2 places at once," Brynden said. "You can be son and king if you pick the right place, and I dislike the way fate has made that sound like advice." Robb laughed once, short, like a dropped plate. "Then the north," he said. Tyrion listened and did not advise unless asked. He had learned that men believed good counsel more digestible if it came on a plate they had already enjoyed. He wrote lists and set them on fire after copying them on his inside skull. He sent letters to Wyman Manderley that read like jokes and were not. He sent coin to the men in the neck who smiled and bit it and then bit men instead. He sent a short letter to Stannis Baratheon and then a longer one to Davos Seaworth, folded into the first like some people hide prayers under floorboards. He was there when Catelyn went down into the undercellar to see Jaime Lannister. The guards stiffened as she passed, as if their bodies had suddenly remembered swords. Brienne of Tarth stood outside the cell door like Faith with a bruise on its cheekbone. When she bowed to Catelyn, there was more honor in the bend of her neck than in whole high seps. "My lady," she said. "He is sullen, which is to say he is himself." Catelyn smiled with her eyes and put a hand on that great arm as if to steady Brienne rather than herself. "You have stood this watch too long, my lady," she said, a kindness Brienne held like a secret jewel. "You will have a new vow if you still want one." Brienne's chin lifted. "To find your younger daughter," she said, as if repeating a vow she had already made every morning before opening her eyes. "If we give her to you in a story," Catelyn said, "bring her back in a truth." "I will bring her back in her own feet," Brienne promised. She looked at the door. "Shall I keep him where he is until I go?" "Yes," Catelyn said and went in. Jaime sat on a bench with his back to the wall and no attempt at handsomeness. He had learned that there are faces no one believes for too long. His hair lay against his skull as if it had learned humility. He had not. He smiled when she entered with a mouth that could still buy him anything uglier than honesty. "Lady Stark," he said, "you have spared me your son's justice. I thank you for that, and I don't. His would have been the work of a moment. Yours is an art. My justice is hungry and patient," she said. "I will feed it on my own time. For now you will sit here and consider this. My daughters' lives weigh more to me than any music you can sing to yourself about knights and kings. You will not leave this place until your family gives me mine." She paused. "There has been kindness shown you in this hall that men would not have thought you deserved. Your tall maid," his eyes flickered, for once unready. "I do not think she likes me." "She does not concern herself with little likes," Catelyn said. "She is going hunting on my behalf. If you have any prayers, give them to her. She has more use of them." When she left, Tyrion was waiting with a cup and a wry expression that had once been armor and now was simply his face. "You have an odd pride," he said softly. "It makes other men quieter." "I have daughters," she said. "That is a kind of pride men do not always understand until they have to." He inclined his head. Letters began to come from the wall like birds blown off course. They spoke of cold and of a sky that had learned a new way to be empty. They spoke of men missing and then not missed enough. They spoke of giants in a tone that was careful because men who speak plainly about giants in the South do not get invited to tables. They spoke of Mance Rayder with respect and of crows with the tenderness one gives to a flawed beloved. Tyrion felt the change in the words first, before the messages themselves became more brief and more breathless and finally rare. The Night's Watch did not sound frightened. They sounded busy. Men who are filling barrels do not have time to explain that the ocean will get here by noon. He took a raven up to the Blackfish and Robb in council and laid it on the table between them as if it were a fish whose bones would tell a future if carefully divined. The message was a handful of words. "Need men, any men send food, any food, we can hold the gate, we cannot hold the world." "I have seen that handwriting," Tyrion said. He wrote like a man who never learned to waste ink. "If you send men and grain and courage now, he will send you back crows who remember your names." Robb stared at the words until they were almost holes in the parchment. "I have a realm to keep from turning to wolves," he said. "I cannot be a king if the world ends." "You cannot be anything if the world ends," Brynden Tully said, and the room let out a breath it had not wished to. "White Harbor," Tyrion said. "Ships, grain already on the wharves. Lord Manderley has cellars that would shame a king. Sail from there to Eastwatch. The river up to Seaguard is navigable if you ask it nicely." He tapped the map. "Brynden goes by land with riders to shake trees and see what bravos fall out. I go by sea because I am more useful when I can talk to men already on the edge of fear." "Robb," he stopped. He had been about to say, "You go north when you can, because there will be nothing left to be king of if you do not." He said instead, "You send what you can afford and lie to yourself about what you can afford." "I can go," Robb said, and stopped himself at the sound of Catelyn's breath. "Not now. Not with winter hiding in the hedges and the west waiting for me to lift my foot and reveal the place to cut." "We will go," Brynden said. "You will be king. The boy who runs to the cold while the house is burning is a fool with good motives. We need a king with bad ones sometimes." "Take my word," Robb said to Tyrion. "Only my word. That is the only coin I have left that spends in all markets." Tyrion smiled despite himself. "Your word buys in more places than mine. I will spend it carefully." White Harbor looked like a fish that had learned masonry. Lord Wyman Manderley sat his chair like a fairy loaded beyond sense. His mouth was fish and judge both. He read the letter, read it again, and then held it to the light as if the thing might reveal a fourth message in the grain. "The North remembers," he said mildly. "Sometimes it remembers food. More often it remembers knives." He clapped his hands just once, and men came as if they had been waiting in the cracks for the sound. "We will load the grain. We will load more grain than is polite. We will put men on ships who have not seen a deck in 15 years, and they will become sailors just to spite me. We will send fish packed in ice in boxes meant for bread. because bread loses patience and fish keep secrets. We will send a letter the length of a pike to the wall, and a second letter the length of a lie to the south to tell them I am too poor to offer my king any aid at all. We will eat frays for dinner, and we will not tell anyone what we had. If there is justice, Tyrion murmured, your cook will be canonized. If there are gods, Wyman returned, they eat. Send your letters, lion. The sea is waiting to have its say. The bay wore a gray pelt when they pushed the first cogs out. Men shouted in voices that had learned the trick of not carrying in the wrong way. Tyrion stood with his cloak clap-cold about his neck and watched the gulls argue the morality of following soldiers for leavings. The ship smelled of tar and men who would not let one another die if it could be helped. He slept badly the way men sleep in new beds, and woke often to make sure the sea had not learned any new habits overnight. They came to Eastwatch in a weather that felt like an old man had sat himself on the world and gone to sleep there. The wall was a blue-white blade laid flat upon the earth. It made everything around it seem invented for its sake. The men who stood beneath it and moved under it and shouted up to one another had the look of men who stood under a king whose appetites could not be sated and had made their peace with that. The first man who came to meet him had a head like a biscuit that had not risen properly and eyes that had seen too much iron. Bowen Marsh, he said, having no patience with courtesies. You brought us bread. And men, Tyrion said, and lies you may find you like. He gestured to the ships, where grain was being bullied ashore by men who pretended none owe. If them were frostbitten. I have letters. I have a plan that is really a prayer. I have a small portion of hope. It will be the most important thing we unload. Marsh's mouth tried very hard not to smile. You will find we pray to things we do not name, he said. Come, Lord Tyrion. We will show you where the wood is for men who have never learned to make a proper fire. Castle Black stank of effort. The smell had courage in it. Tyrion thought, not for the first time, how much more bearable a man's fate is when the men around him are doing what they can. They showed him Jon Snow at dusk. The boy was not a boy. He wore exhaustion like a garment he had not asked for, but that fit him regardless. When he turned, the lines around his mouth said he had learned to bite his own words in half to keep them from going to waste. Lord Tyrion, he said, a flicker of something at the corner of his mouth that might have been a memory of a warmth long ago. You brought food. Yes, Tyrion said, and friendly lies. We have had unfriendly truth, Jon said. This will be a novelty. They stood on the wall together and let the wind go through them. The forest was a black ocean, and in its strange small lamps moved where men had the indecency to continue living. Far to the west, something glowed with a color that did not belong in the world. Tyrion looked at it and felt the shame one feels when one has been having petty arguments at a table and a storm has been attempting to speak through the windows. Mance Rayder, Jon said. He has more men than all the songs suggest and fewer fools. He is not my enemy. That is what I tell myself sometimes to survive how the world sounds. So, Tyrion said after a time, we will be men who can count. You have archers. Enough, Jon said. Not enough to stop giants, if they decide to forget what arrows mean. His hair had too much winter in it. They have mammoths, Lord Tyrion. I say that sentence to men I have not learned to trust yet, so I can watch their eyes and see whether they will laugh. If they laugh, they will die. If they do not, they may die later. Tyrion nodded. He traced numbers on the ice with a mittened finger and then wiped them away as if they were blasphemy. Stannis is coming, he said. He will come whether I write him another letter or burn the ones I have already sent. He will come because he likes cold justice and cold makes him think better of himself. Jon's mouth turned. He will want a king to bend, he said. He can want what he likes, Tyrion said. We will give him an enemy to fight, and he will take it because he has spent his life measuring himself against proper enemies. We will hold the wall because the wall has never learned how to fall down. And we will get through the next 3 days. Then, perhaps, we will remember to sleep. The next day broke like a brittle plate. When it cracked, it sang. The horns sounded, and men ran because they had been waiting their whole lives to run. Tyrion's breath made his lungs feel like parchment crumpled and then smoothed again. The wildlings came out of the trees like a story told too many times, still able to frighten because of how true it wanted to be. There were men in furs. There were women with the look of iron. There were giants. And the first time the wall felt the tread of a mammoth, the stones shivered with old memory. Arrows shook the air like 1,000 thrown straws and stuck in men, and in wood, and in the very idea of what breath was. Tyrion found he had forgotten to be afraid in any useful way. He discovered he had two kinds of fear. The old one, which worried about whether he would be small enough to be stepped on, and the new one, which cared only whether the rope would hold the gate when it needed to. He discovered he liked the new one better. He lit what needed lighting. He sent men where their dying would mean something. He stood with Jon and men whose names he did not know and watched as Donal Noy, who had arms like old boulders, went to the gate with his hammer and planted himself at the hinge like a saint deciding where to stand for his own martyrdom. You could hear the giant's breath, a vast animal, and you could hear men's prayers underneath it if you had the wrong sort of ears. When the giant came through, he filled the world for an instant. He was a mountain come in from the weather. He fell, and the entire watch felt it in their teeth. Noy fell with him. Tyrion closed his eyes and saw a smith's smile over a tankard, and the memory settled itself on his shoulder like a warm hand. Mance himself came up with parley on his mouth and fire in his eyes. He had the kind of face that would have learned laughing if the world had been fair. He looked at Jon and Jon looked at him, and something like respect moved between their chests whether they liked it or not. "Let the dead things have the cold," Mance said. "Open your gate and let us through, and you can go back to policing thieves and losing boys to winter stories." "We cannot open the gate," Jon said. He was not being brave. He was being honest. "If we open it for you, it will stay open and other things will come to call." Mance's mouth hardened. "Then we'll come over it," he said, as if the wall were a fence and not a fact. "Then you will die trying," Jon said softly, "and we will die stopping you. The dead will clap either way." "Men clap better," Mance returned and turned away. The attack came on the third day when even fear had gone hoarse. It was not a new sort of attempt. It was simply relentless. The wall learned that day that men could run out of arrowheads and find more, that iron could be asked to do more than iron had planned for itself. The wall learned too that banners do not keep men warm and that songs do not make rope stronger. Tyrion learned that he could find a joke under ice and keep it to himself like a fire a man protects with his own body. When the horns changed, it felt like the ground remembered being younger. The sound rolled in from the east, and men turned their heads as one as if they had all seen a bird at the same moment. Between one breath and the next, sails appeared in the throat of the world. It was impossible. It was Stannis Baratheon, which is a different way of saying the same thing. He came ashore looking like a sardonic winter. He did not greet. He assessed. Men made themselves worth the assessment or learned how to find snow uncomfortable for new reasons. His banner was pure and unpleasant. His sword, when he drew it, burned with the cold light of old faith. Men who had not chosen to care about gods found themselves watching it anyway. Tyrion met him in a room with walls thick enough to keep men's words from the wind. Davos Seaworth stood at the king's shoulder and kept his hands open at his sides, which is a way of saying I have nothing to hide and an invitation to be called fool. "Lannister," Stannis said without garnish, "you have a talent for showing up where you are not wanted." "Yes," Tyrion said, "there are many talents I cannot claim. I have cultivated the ones that begin heated arguments." "You will not have your father's rock," Stannis said. "You will not have the south. You will not have this wall. You will have my thanks if you stand aside." "I did not come to take the wall," Tyrion said. "I came to keep it standing. If you want it kept, I will help you keep it. If you want to take it, I will help you count the corpses." Davos smiled very slightly. It made his face look younger and sadder. "He's not wrong, your grace." Stannis' mouth was a fortification. "The boy Stark," he said. "A king," Tyrion said then, because Stannis respected words too much not to be corrected. "A king with food in his cellars and more men who will come when he asks than you will like to believe. He will not bend knee to you. He will not put his crown on your table like a loaf and beg the slices. You can cut his throat and inherit his winter. Or you can speak to him as if the dead do not bend either, and you can have your war with him later, under a sky that allows wars. The throne is mine, Stannis said. It is not a claim. It is a fact. So is winter, Tyrion replied. He spread his hands. You have a priest who makes light. The North has men who remember how to eat snow without dying. If we are, the Night's Watch cannot afford kings. It needs men who will behave as if they were better. Stannis looked at him with an expression like frost. Then he looked at Davos, whose eyes had learned how to be both loyal and frank. Then he looked at the map, and at the wall itself as if the thing had spoken his name in a tone he couldn't refuse. Send, he said at last. If I can take a king on a wall, I will take him. Tyrion sent. Robb sent back that he had no time for men who liked the feel of their own names on their tongues, but that he would come because he had more time for dead things less than he preferred. He came by sea on a ship that had been a whaler once. It moved through the slush with the expression of a beast insulted by the quality of water on offer. He stepped onto the ice and carried winter with him the way men carry old swords. He looked older and younger both, as he always did in moments that mattered. He went to Stannis the way a man goes into a room he knows does not belong to him. Upright, careful, unwilling to apologize. Your Grace, he said to Stannis, and in his voice was every slightly bent knee that winter required. Your men have our thanks. You have my thanks. Now the wall has held, we can continue to argue about smaller things like the shape of the world. Stannis looked at him as if someone had handed him a tool he did not recognize but could use. You wear a crown, he said. I do, Robb said. You are free to dislike it. The dead do not care for crowns. We will speak again in 1 week. For now. He gestured to the ramparts, to the men with bandaged hands who had not remembered to take off their mail. We must sleep. Stannis almost smiled. It was a tight thing. It looked as if it had been smuggled onto his face by a conspirator. 1 week, he agreed. We will see which of us looks more like a king when we have our breath back. They slept in shifts and woke in the frost's fist. Men ate and shat and cursed each other into better courage. Tyrion moved among them with bowls and the sort of words that linger at the edge of jokes. Then step away so the heart can keep beating. He found Jon at dawn with Ghost at his hip like a piece of weather. The dire wolf put his nose into Tyrion's palm and decided the little man was not to be mistaken for food. Your hand shakes, Jon observed. I am practicing at being alive, Tyrion said. It requires a distinct tremor. Jon huffed, which for him was nearly a laugh. You did well, he said. For a lord. For a man, Tyrion said. He could not remember the last time he had held himself this upright without help. The week turned. Stannis and Robb met in a room that smelled of smoke and the sort of pride that thickens air. Davos and the Blackfish stood by, guardians of sense. Tyrion watched the words move like pieces on a Syvas board and was pleased to discover he did not intend to win for himself. Your rebellion is treason, Stannis said without heat, which mad. It worse. Theirs was first, Robb replied, just as calm, which made it better. We will not kneel to a boy king who thinks a throne is a chair you bleed on to make it yours. We will not kneel to a queen who loves a son more than law. We will not kneel to you when kneeling is a lie. But we will fight the same enemy, and we will not stab one another while we do. I could beat you, Stannis said, purely by way of sorting the file of facts in his mind. Perhaps, Robb said. You will bleed men you need to keep fires going, and while you count I will ride and the dead will do arithmetic differently. His mouth softened. I do not say this to taunt. I say it because the boy you were still lives in you, and he will remember that there are times when honor looks like doing something you disliked. Davos' hand made the smallest motion. Stannis I flicked to it and away. I am not an oath-breaker, he said. Nor am I, Robb returned. That is why the oaths I keep must be ones I can live inside. In the end, they wrote a thing that was neither treaty nor truce. A list of practicalities with no poetry in it, and thus likely to do someone good. Men and food would be sent on a schedule the Wall's ravens could keep time by. The North would render no homage to any throne south of Moat Cailin, and would not raise sword against the crown so long as the crown did not walk north. Stannis would not declare Robb traitor until such time as the dead were back in their old beds. And Robb would not name Stannis usurper until there were apples on trees again. It was the sort of agreement men laughed at when drunk and obeyed when sober. When it was done, they looked at one another with the curious intimacy that comes to men who have learned that the other can be relied upon to be himself. They did not shake hands. They hardly nodded. The paper sat between them like a sixth man in the room. On the way south after, Tyrion stood at the ship's rail and watched the sea try to teach itself a new trick. The air was a knife. He thought of his father and of Cersei, and of the boy he had been who had stood on the wall the first time and let the view carve him. He thought of Sansa, who had learned to swing a wooden blade without believing she had to become a blade to deserve to hold one. He did not see the raven until it was nearly on his fist. It thumped as if relieved to have found a solid thing in the world to trust. He took the letter. The wax was green with a tiny wolf's head stamped into it. He broke it and read Brynden Tully's spare hand. Fry men in White Harbor. 3 less today. Manderly fed and fed. He does arithmetic differently than other men. Roose moved from the rills without being told to move. Ramsay has been seen near Barrowton with men who wear a man as their flag. Robb requests your presence at Winterfell when you can arrive and not before you should. Bring your jokes. We will need a few. Tyrion laughed aloud into the cold. It startled a gull. It startled himself. We shall bring pies, he told the sea, and the wind took it and wrung it out and dropped it beside the keel. Winterfell was a thumbprint of smoke and black outlines against the snow. It had begun to be itself again in the way houses do when someone who knows the names for things moves through their rooms. Robb stood under the first repaired arch and looked for a moment like a boy who had been brought back to the place where his own height had been measured on a wall with charcoal. Then he put the expression away and became a king. The Great John had built a camp outside the ruined South Gate and refused to sleep within the walls. I like a roof with stars on it, he told Tyrion, and then, more quietly, let the boy have his ghosts to speak to without our snoring. Sansa came out of the dim light of the hall, as if the air had decided to remember summer very briefly. She had soot under one eye and did not know it. She put her hands out and took Tyrion's hands and squeezed, as if they were the last warm stones in a fire. You came back, she said. I am hardy, Tyrion said, like a weed. I have made a life of growing in poor soil. He looked at her face, at the way the girl had begun to wind itself around a spine like iron. You have more of your mother in you every day. I hope not, she said, and then caught her breath. That was unfair, he finished. It was honest. She would forgive you for both. Where is she? In the Godswood, Sansa said. She spends hours there with the snow in her hair. Sometimes she speaks. Sometimes she sits with her hand on a root and then stands later looking rested, as if the tree had said something kind. Trees are remarkably good at saying nothing cruel, Tyrion said. Arya arrived like weather. It was not the sort of return men put banners to, though 3 men did die for having chosen to be in the wrong place when the Hound decided he would not be cheated of a fight. The scouts found them first. A tethered stag of a man and a girl who looked as if she had learned to be her own shadow. The Blackfish rode to them with men who had learned not to draw on Sandor Clegane unless they had made their peace with other decisions first. You are an ugly road, the Hound told Brynden, staring at his trout. You were once a handsome man, Brynden returned. Time corrects us all. Arya sat behind the Hound and watched with the feral stillness of someone who has made forgetting an art. When she saw Sansa standing beside the gate, she slid off the horse with a movement that betrayed how much her body had learned of hard ground and how quickly she was willing to teach it to move again. She walked the last 10 steps. She did not run. She put her arms around her sister like a child who cannot decide whether to cry or bite someone and chooses the thing that will not start a new war. Catelyn came down the steps slowly. Her hair was salted with the snow in a way that made her look briefly like a woman from the old stories, a line drawer of fates. She stopped 2 steps above her younger daughter, as if terrified that the magic would break if she moved too fast. Then she stepped down the last two and pulled Arya into the sort of embrace that makes the world step back respectfully. Tyrion turned away, not from discomfort, but because there are things one watches only to be certain one has not imagined them. Afterward, a man should leave them with themselves. The hound stood 6 paces off with the particular awkwardness of a dog whose master had unexpectedly learned how to laugh. The scar under his eye was a brighter pink in the cold. "I did not bring her for you," he told Tyrion without preamble. "I brought her because she wanted to see whether she would be a ghost if she came home. Pay me if you insist. I'll spend it on wine and a horse that bites me." "I will pay you in both," Tyrion said soulfully, "and in thanks." "Keep your soft words for the fire," the hound growled, and yet his shoulders were looser than they had been. Robb had a room set aside in a tower that remembered fire as a lover rather than a terror. He met his mother's eyes there over a table with no map on it and found that he could breathe a little more. Arya lay in a pile of furs that had been someone's already and slept with the knife under her pillow. Sansa sat by the brazier and mended a shirt that would never fit any of her brothers again and kept her fingers busy by force. They spoke of Bolton. The name made the flames shrink. "He has moved without asking me," Robb said. "He has written without answering. He is doing exactly what he should, in places where no one can see whether he is doing it or not. He is waiting for a permission he has already given himself," Brynden said. "Then we should give him the thing he's waiting to excuse," Catelyn said, very soft. They looked at her. "Take his hostage. Take his son. Bring Ramsay here with the courtesies due his father's son, and keep him under skins until snow has made it impossible for Roose to do anything but visit and remember how to drink hot wine. A wolf does not wrestle a man inside a house. He brings the man to the yard." Tyrion tilted his head. "Ramsay Snow," he said, tasting the name as if it were a bad fruit. "He will not come to a place where the rules do not protect him." "He will if he thinks it's his idea," Sansa said from the chair, without looking up. Her needle moved, moved. "He will if there is a girl here he thinks is a bird he can cut wings from." "Lady Sansa," Robb began, and she looked up, and whatever he had meant to say remembered itself and left his mouth. "Let him think I am a bird," she said. "Let him think I am a bird inside a cage with a small door. He will put his hand in to pull me out. Men like him have hands. They do not suspect that we keep knives behind doors." She glanced at Tyrion. "If there is a better lie, say it. For once, I do not mind being danced." "There is no better lie for a man like that than the truth told with a ribbon on it," Tyrion said slowly. "Invite him to a feast." He looked at Catelyn and felt the weight of his own words. "With bread and salt and more eyes than he will count. He will come because no one is small enough inside his head to deny him comfort." "And you will not kill him there," Catelyn said sharply. "We will not. We do not corrupt the ground we stand for." "No," Tyrion said. "We will not kill him. We will let him show every man in the hall what he is." Brynden's eyebrow made its slight venture up. "You think he will unwrap himself like a gift?" "I think men like that are gifts to themselves," Tyrion said. "They cannot resist opening them again and again." The invitation went like a falcon with leather on its feet, carried a message wrapped in compliments. It spoke of mending old wounds that had never been mended, and of a hall that remembered how to be warm, and of a king who wished to show courtesy to a lord who had served him in the East. It had none of the words about music or knives that had once traveled with letters in the Riverlands. Men who had read those letters had learned something. If they had not, they were dead. Ramsay came. Of course he did. He came with men in flayed man livery, and with a woman on a lead as if the insult were a belt he could not resist buckling. He came with a smile that could not decide what its joke was. Outside the gates he played with his hounds and let them lick his hands. Inside, he let them wait and kept his own hands plainly visible. He could be taught. He bowed to Robb with his hands spread, and to Catelyn with his head too low, and to Sansa with his mouth open like a man imagining the feel of a ripe fruit he had not paid for. Sansa's eyes looked past him and through him to a tree she had found in her mind. Arya sat with a wooden cup and glared, and the hound stood behind her, as if he were everyone's punishment for having allowed this scene to occur. They ate, they drank. They told stories about men who had died long ago, because those are the safest men to speak of in a hall. Ramsay laughed at the right times while his eyes busied themselves with other arithmetic. He did not eat enough bread for anyone in the hall to feel spiritually protected. He wiped his knife on his sleeve as if cleaning it made it more honest. Wyman Manderley told a story about a pie. It was not the pie that mattered, or perhaps everything was pies. He told it as if he were an old woman entertaining children. His hands made swift little jokes as if they were themselves. Phrase present, few and bloodless of face, laughed carefully. Tyrion watched, and the thing in him that remembered the letter about music hummed with careful contentment. Roose Bolton did not come. Men like that rarely attend their own autopsy. He sent a quiet letter, folded small, in which the words were spaced like accounts written by a man who intends to bring the sums out differently to different diters. He sent compliments. He sent a tiny strip of parchment inserted at the very end that read, "It will snow early." "Roose is a weather vane," Brynden said when he had read it. "But the wind that moves him is never the one that touches our faces. I would like him in irons in this hall where I can hear him breathe. I would like that very much." "You cannot always have dessert," Robb murmured. "Things do not build toward a moment. They build away from it." Ramsay's dogs got into the kitchens at dawn the third day and took a leg of mutton and a scullion's thumb. Ramsay explained to the girl on the lead, in a voice that let the hall overhear, how merciful he was being by not letting the dogs understand they were allowed to taste more. Sansa's eyes went somewhere far away where the snow fell heavier. When she came back, her mouth made itself into a little line, and every woman at the table saw it and nodded to themselves. At high noon, in a corridor where tapestries had been hung again to teach the stone to remember warmth, Ramsay put his hand on Arya's shoulder as if he were telling a joke with his fingers. He did not expect the knife. He did not expect that the hound's hand would be on his wrist in time to make the blade miss the line that would have been fatal and land instead in the meat that would make him roar and yet keep him from being dangerous for the next important breath. He did not expect Sansa to step in and take Arya's hand in the same motion. He did not expect, perhaps most of all, that the men around him would not look to see what the king would say. They looked to see what Catelyn Stark's eyes were doing. They were not doing mercy. Ramsay laughed. Not bravely. Stupidly. He said words about girls and about wolves and about cages. He bled on the rushes. He tried to make it a scene where he was still the one with the script. Great John Umber walked forward and took him by the throat very gently and walked him backward into the hall, into the full sight of the men who had been eating and telling one another comfortable lies about the future. He held him there without closing his hand any more and said, in a voice like a barn door moving in a high wind, "You were not invited to touch." Ramsay spat, came out pink. He smiled then, a real one. He tried to spit again. It did not improve matters. He said Roose's name like a prayer. "Bread and salt," Catelyn said from the dais, and the room made a sound like a man trying not to confess. "He took neither," Wyman Manderley called, almost jolly. "I have counted, because I like counting." Ramsay attempted to speak a law backwards. Sansa, who had learned to listen for backward laws, stepped forward, and because this was not a court and not a battlefield and not a place where a girl's mouth could be bartered away any longer, she said, "You brought a woman on a leash to my brother's hall. You put your hand on my sister. There is a tree outside that has listened to all the promises made in this place since men learned to stand upright. You will make one more. You will promise never to set a foot in the north without being invited. You will promise on your flayed man. You will go home, and if you break this, even you will know what men mean when they say the north remembers." The hall was very quiet. Ramsay's mouth made shapes. He was not used to being asked to promise things he could not make untrue by deciding to be someone else. He glanced to the door the way a man glances to a river when he realizes he is further out than he meant to be and the current owns his legs now. The hound's hand tightened exactly enough to make the glance become a blink. "I promise," he said at last, the word tasting like an undercooked thing. Good, Sansa said. I will remember you said it. They turned him over to his own men and watched him go with a dignity that infuriated him more than any blow would have. He went into the snow like a stain thrown into whitewash. Tyrion let out a breath so slowly he felt weaker for having been clever enough not to die doing something brave. Roose will call that mercy, Brynden said at his elbow. He will say we are soft. Let him, Tyrion said. Men like that do not understand that the right sort of soft goes hard when you try to put your teeth through it. News came from the west as news does, late and with pieces missing. Tywin had set the west in order like a man who thinks if he arranges his table exactly right dinner will never be spoiled. Cersei had made half a dozen new laws inside her heart and only 3 on paper. Tommen smiled and courtiers sighed. Oberyn Martell came and laughed very low at nothing at all. Ser Gregor was seen less often. Men who had done old crimes discovered that the heir had learned their names and would say them in strange hours. The Tyrells kept the city fed by telling it they were fat, and the city believed them for a while. Tyrion wrote no letters to his father after that, not because he had run out of words, but because anyone who wrote Tywin Lannister a letter was agreeing to speak his language. He learned to keep his silence the way one keeps a weapon that has not yet learned whether it is a knife or a mirror. The winter showed its teeth. Snow turned from decoration to infrastructure. Roads altered themselves. Men followed. Where the white knife narrowed, the ice became a decision with consequences. Where the neck spread, men became frogs or sank. Men who had once watched the sky to guess at rain learned to listen to it to guess at knives. Stannis sent men as promised and did not like doing it, which somehow made him a better man. Robb watched them come and thought, not for the first time, that men can be counted on to do the thing they dislike if you hand them a good enough reason and a little less pride than they prefer. Arya learned to move with a blade in her hand in cold that made it feel like a grievance. The Hound told her where to put her feet and how to fail. She learned to be bored by the same swing until boredom became precision. Sansa learned to speak to women with knives in their smiles without bleeding. Catelyn learned to sleep little and in that little to dream only of water that did not drown anything. The Blackfish taught boys he disliked to hold pikes he hated with hands he respected. Wyman Manderley sent a pie to Winterfell under cover of politics. It was very good. He sent a letter under it that tasted of black humor and justice. No one mentioned the phrase on the road north who had failed to arrive at any destination at all. Tyrion went once more to the wall at the tail end of a convoy of sledges that made a new sound in the quiet when snow took the breath out of its own mouth. He went because he could not bear to think of the men there as a letter written in black ink. He went because Jon Snow smiled only in his presence in a way that made Tyrion feel as if he had forgiven something about his own childhood by mistake and found he could live with it after all. "Is the boy a king still?" Jon asked him in a rare hour when wind permitted speech. "He is," Tyrion said. "He wears the crown like men wear winter. It is a fact, and not always a comfort. How goes your dead?" "They are patient," Jon said. "I have that to thank them for." He did not say that he had had to put men with old faces on pyres with his own hand because others could not bear to do it. He did not say that the first time a white hand had come up out of a drift near his boot, he had brought Ghost down with a sound that did not belong to any dog, and that the thing had not shouted when its arm tore because it had nothing left in it worth complaint. He did not say many things. He did not need to. They spoke of Stannis. They spoke of Melisandre, whose eyes could make even Tyrion feel uncomfortable in his jokes. They spoke of Davos, who was balm after fire. They spoke of letters from the south that had begun to read like ration cards for rumor. They did not speak of the fate of thrones as if thrones were not chairs in cold rooms. In the west, Tywin kept his correspondence in perfect stacks and made 3 plans for every plan and then cut the paper thin enough to let his fingers think there were fewer. He sent a quiet man east to speak to Roose Bolton about patience. The quiet man did not return. He sent a noise to the Riverlands instead. A band of debt collectors with swords who measured fields by how much they could drink from them and then sent the bill with the blades. Robb sent them back with teeth in a sack to show he paid what was owed in the currency delivered. Cersei opened a new vintage of grievance. She drank it by the cup and by the audience. Sometimes she remembered to listen to Marjorie tell her stories about flowers. Sometimes she did not. Once, late at night, she took a goblet into a room where no one was allowed and looked at a bed that had been made for two and laughed and wept the way weather does when it cannot decide what season to be. If there were men watching, they kept their eyes closed as if that could make them honorable. In the Vale, Lisa Arryn peered at the world through a window and told it to stop moving. In Dorne, a prince old before his time taught a child to tilt her chin and not give the world the satisfaction of seeing the inside of her mouth. Across the sea, a girl with 3 dragons learned that victory tastes of ash if your subjects are hungry. The world spread its tales like a gambler spreads cards on a table and does not admit the deck is missing several kings. The day the first white raven came south from the citadel, the sky was of a kind to accept it. The bird carried winter on its back in a way even men drunk on their own news could not deny. It clapped its wings and landed on the Rock and on Winterfell and on King's Landing and on Deepwood Motte with the same disregard for rank. Men lit more fires and pretended they were not afraid of seeing their breath. Women took out blankets they had hidden in summer as if they were surprises they had planned all along. In Winterfell they read the scroll in the Great Hall and listened to the old words that had always pretended to be a surprise. Robb stood with his hands behind his back and felt the chill go through the iron at his heart like a story that has been waiting for the last word to be said aloud before it allows itself to be true. "We are ready," Catelyn said quietly afterward, to no one and everyone. "We are not," Tyrion said with a candor that had taught him to be loved by few and trusted by some. "But we will behave as if we are, and that will make us more ready than our enemies." "Which enemies?" Brynden asked. "The ones who bleed or the ones who do not?" Tyrion looked north. The snow outside had begun to fall in flakes that did not trouble themselves with the ground. They took their time. "Yes," he said. That evening, in a room that had known older songs, Sansa sang. It was a soft thing she hummed at first because voice had become a dangerous currency, and then she raised it because the faces around her had taken on the expression of men who remembered being allowed to be still in the presence of another sound. Arya listened and did not fidget. Robb sat with a cup he forgot to drink and held it like a promise he could not keep and would keep anyway. The Hound leaned against the wall and scowled with the particular relief of a man who has not had to move his hand to a weapon for an entire song. Tyrion sat very close to the fire and warmed his hands and pretended they were not shaking. He thought of a letter that had said something about music being very fine. He thought of the music in this room which was not fine but was right. He thought of his father looking at a tent pole and making plans around a single line of canvas. He thought of the sea, and of the wall, and of a girl with 3 dragons whose name the wind had learned to say badly. He thought of pawns. He thought of kings. He slept, when he slept, with his head pillowed on his own arm like a child. In his dreams he was walking a corridor of stone while the world tried to teach itself a new song. The walls whispered. They sounded like trees, and like rope, and like banners in a wind that did not care what the banners meant. When he woke, the snow had come down and decided to stay. What follows in winters is not narrative. It is labor. Men carry water. Women carry children. Old men carry old stories and set them down where hands can reach them. Axes live on as proof there was wood to be found. Grain becomes a form of prayer. Sickness becomes a new language the body speaks without warning. Swords do not rust because they are used to cut meat for soups that lie about their ingredients. In that slow siege, danger comes in bursts like birds out of a thicket. The first word of it was inked in a hand Tyrion recognized and disliked. It said, "Your mercy became my geography. I have found a path through it. Meet me where the Dreadfort's shadow cannot reach, and we will see whether the man outweighs the map." Roose Bolton had written it, or more accurately, one of his fingers had. It was the sort of letter that does not exist until it is answered. Tyrion showed it to Robb and to Catelyn and to the Blackfish. He showed it to Sansa last. "He wants to bring his knife to our table," Sansa said. "Halfway so he can pretend to be reasonable. There is always a halfway with men like that. It is where they keep their teeth." "Nevertheless," Robb said, "we must go." "Not you," Catelyn said instantly. You are the thing he intends to cut. Send a man he thinks is not his match and then have the match be set ahead of him. Brynden smiled slightly. It has been some time since I was thought slower than my shadow, he said. Send me. He looked at Tyrion. And the little lion. Roose will bring his cunning. We should bring ours. They met on a frozen ford little used in summer. A place of narrow water and reed husks and wind that carried no scent because nothing was alive in it to give one off. Roose came as he always came. Alone under a flag that told you he had friends somewhere else. He looked like a regret someone had dressed well. His eyes slid over Tyrion and lodged on Brynden like a dart. My lords, he said. The wind pushed at his voice and he did not raise it. It did not occur to him that wind might possibly want to hear him. Cold day for commerce. We are not trading, Brynden said. We are always trading, Roose returned. Today I have brought honesty. You will find it fits badly but wears long. Tyrion stepped forward. Honesty. You sent your bastard to a place we had begun to remember we loved in order to set a fire that would teach us to stop loving. You did it while writing to us about mud and fog in the east so that we would admire your diligence. You intended to eat at our table and then tell tales of how you were starved. You brought us tales of bread, and of salt, and of sly knives. Roose blinked, which in him was akin to another man falling down. Your honesty, he said, is sometimes quaint. We will have no more of it, Brynden said. If you intend to be exactly true henceforward, we will consider leaving you your fort. If you intend to be exactly your old self, we will show you how a river learns to run around a rock and make the rock look foolish. If you intend to split the difference will split you. Roose's mouth wanted to become a smile and did not. I am a loyal man. You are a man, Tyrion said. The rest remains to be seen. Roose did not give them anything satisfying. Men like that do not. He did give them a small thing, a list of 3 names. Men who had ridden with him and written to Tywin and smiled in Winterfell and said the right words in the hall and beaten a servant's child for looking too long at the banner on a wall. It was a gift of the particular sort a subtle traitor offers. Small enough to be dismissed, real enough to prove the hand held something. Why? Brynden asked afterward, as they rode back through thickening snow. Because men like him prefer to put off their deaths, Tyrion said. If he buys a week by selling 3 men he did not need, he calls that profit. If he thinks we will spend that week counting and not watching him, he calls that economy. He will live a long time if we let him go on being good at that arithmetic. You do not intend to let him, Brynden observed. I intend to let winter distract him while we teach his son the meaning of a promise, Tyrion said. When he looks up, he will find we have eaten his chair. They set about it without banners. There are wars men take to fields. There are wars men take to ledgers and to doors and to night walks in halls. Wyman Manderley sent men who wore no colors. The Umbers came quietly for once in their lives, which is the only quiet the world hears. The Karstarks sent a small letter that felt like an apology for a grief that still slept next to them. Women who had married flayed men taught their brothers to count cattle with different eyes. The dread fort did not burn. That would have been romantic and false. It woke up one morning and discovered its taxes had fewer places to go and its winter stores spoiled at the corners and its dogs sick, and its ravens finding nowhere to land without carrying back another sort of news. It discovered no guest right anywhere but at its own table. It discovered it was a cold island in a sea fewer and fewer men cared to sail. Ramsay, denied hunting, became a hunter of his own temper. He sent a letter that used too many words for a man whose habits are all economy of kindness. Sansa read it and put it into the fire with tongs. Men who write like that have already lost the love of their own rooms, she said. They will be sleeping on benches soon. She was right. 3 weeks later a servant spoke at the wrong time and Ramsay struck him hard enough that his jaw swung down and stuck. The servant bled to death quietly. 2 nights after that, for more servants walked away and kept walking until they reached a small camp where the great John did not stop smiling while they ate. Tywin's reply to all of it was to send no reply. Masters of storms assume rain speaks enough. He wrote instead to Cersei in phrases that would have seemed affectionate to anyone who had never been required to stand under Tywin Lannister's affection. He praised Tommen's severity in small matters. He advised Marjorie's grandmother to take up lace-making. He sent coin to men in Old Town who had taught him numbers and asked if any of them had sons who liked difficult work. He took the names Brynden Tully had extracted from Roose and set them to one side and then circled them in red and then did nothing at all, which was sometimes how he said, "We will see." The days shortened until they felt like insults. The fires never seemed to learn. Tyrion began to think in lists of possessions. A piece of Arctic sunlight that never properly warmed him. The sound of Sansa's voice when she was speaking to a child. The precise grimace the Blackfish made when humor threatened him like a tooth. The feel of once again seeing Jon Snow leaning on a parapet and knowing the boy had not learned to stop watching the horizon for the next task. When he dreamed, and he did not often, the letter that had once smelled of wedding music drifted through the air of his mind like a snowflake. Each time he reached for it, it melted and left his fingers wet. He grew used to the fact that he had changed the song once and it had not been enough to end music at all. He grew to like that thought a little. One night the alarm bell went in Winterfell with a tone like anger. Tyrion rolled out of his bed among the old stones and was out in the yard before memory had caught up with him. The dogs were making the loud calculating sounds dogs make when they have been surprised but still prefer to win. Men came out with spears and with the looks of men who had never properly slept. Snow fell with renewed ambition. At the south postern a figure stumbled and fell and crawled and then did not move. The guard who reached her first bent and made a sound that woke Tyrion's heart as thoroughly as if a bell had been rung inside his own chest. Sansa was there before anyone had intended she be told. She moved faster than men remembered she could. She knelt and turned the girl and said a name in a tone that set the snow to listening. "Theon," the girl said without breath. It was Mira Reed, whose hair had learned to be matte. She had a hand on a boy's arm. Bran, eyes looking out from a place farther than a room. Hodder lifted him with the gentleness of a tide. The world had taken its time and delivered back to the north a prince who had been traveling in other rooms. Sansa put her palm to Bran's forehead as if the old gods had changed the ritual without warning. Arya made a sound that might have started as a laugh and ended somewhere else and then contained both. Robb ran. He had forgotten how to run in a room. The yard taught his legs their old obedience. "Brother," Bran said, voice like a thaw, "the roots are deeper than we thought." "I will learn to listen," Robb said hoarsely. His hands shook where they held the shoulders under that wild hair. "I swear it." Tyrion found a corner of the hall and let his back learn it. He watched as the house took in its own blood and fed it and warmed it and made beds and promises. He was not part of this. That, too, felt right in a way his bones recognized as just. Later, when quiet came like a friend without breath, Bran turned his eyes on him and smiled very little. "You helped once," he said. "You helped again." "I do not always intend to be helpful," Tyrion said. "It would ruin my reputation." "The trees sometimes intend nothing," Bran said, solemn as a child priest. "They still are very helpful." Tyrion bowed his head to the boy, to the man he would be, to the forest on the other side of the walls that had learned everyone's names. He slept that night with the sound of wolves in his ears and knew, finally, it was not a threat. It was a census. Years later, for there would be years. The world grudgingly allows them even in winters. Men would sit in rooms warmed by their own breath and tell stories about a time when a dwarf and a wolf king and a bastard on a wall, and a fish who was a sword and a mother who learned how not to break and two girls who learned to be selves rather than symbols conspired, quite against their natures, to let one another live. Those stories would get details wrong. They would put certain speeches in the wrong mouths because the wrong mouths had the better shape for them. They would forget pies and remember letters and vice versa. Some would leave out Tywin Lannister falling and rising and falling again, depending on who told them and what they wanted their children to be afraid of. Tyrion would not correct them. He would sit under a roof that had learned to drip correctly in thaw and sip a wine that had not had to be lit on the way down his throat and remember a green glow on a river and a horn's absurd bravery and the feel of rope under his fingers and the way a girl's hand had felt when he told her that there was a door in the gilded cage and that he was stubborn enough to scrape the lock until it gave. He would watch Robb command a room by the simple act of not being the loudest voice in it. He would watch Sansa learn to judge without cruelty, and Arya to kill without becoming murder. And when the day came, because there would be a day, when the dead asked for an accounting with the patience that cannot be argued with, the men who answered that knock would find that they did not need to be clever so much as steadfast. They would find that the music of the world was not fine, but it was strong, and that there were chords in it deep and law. Sting, made of very old wood and new rope and the breath of wolves and of men who had learned the trick of telling the truth when a lie would have felt prettier on the tongue. They would stand, and the snow would come down, and somewhere very far away a woman with dragons would settle her hand upon her knee and decide which way to blow. And in Winterfell, which had remembered itself stubbornly, a small man would lift a cup and clink it against a king's without looking away from the door, and the sound would be no music at all. It would be enough.